Get it, boys! Get it! Allison is trying to fall high side into those rocks. You're there. That's where you want to be. You're good. Pop it and gas it. There you go. It's like we weren't even here. There you go. Nice work.
Are you ready, sir?
Yes, sir.
Carbureted or fuel injected?
Fuel injected.
2-stroke or 4-stroke?
2-stroke.
East Coast or West Coast?
West Coast.
On-road or off-road?
Is that even a question? Off-road.
Dual sport, dirt or adventure?
Dirt on an adventure.
Like it. Fast or technical?
Technical.
Sweepers or hairpins?
Both. I love them both. I don't know. I can't pick one.
What was your first two-wheeled motorized vehicle?
1973 Honda SL350.
What's your favorite bike in your garage?
The Ténéré.
What's your name and where are you from?
Andy Janik, Chicago, Illinois.
Perfect. All right, sir. And then we'll do the usual from here. All right, boys and girls, we're live, and maybe even if we tune in, we might do video this time around with Andy Janik, the returning guest. What's up, man?
What has this been? This is our fourth one. We did two together. We've done a group one.
Yeah.
So this is our fourth or our third?
Well, I mean, I guess Ace and Gary had to have a podcast, right?
Ace and Gary have to have a podcast. That'll be the next one. Ace and Gary's podcast.
It's relevant in this case.
Oh man,
because we did that
perfect.
7-hour together, and then it was Ace and Gary rides again for the Hard Enduro, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Oh man, jumping right into it.
It's so good. Obviously, it's been a non-productive winter for me, and it sounds like you've been buried at work thus far.
I have to apologize now because I'm probably gonna cough and grunt and stuff a bunch. I got COVID like 4 weeks ago, and it put me on my ass for like a week, and then that gave me bronchitis, and I have this just like lingering cough.
Yeah.
It feels like a truck is sitting on my chest. Like my endurance is shot. I can't breathe deep. So like all that cardio, I've been working super hard because I've been training. I got a physical trainer now to train for
Sweet.
Romania, and all that cardio that I gained it's completely gone. So I've been working really hard. I get up every day at like usually about 5:30. I try and get a session in like 45 minutes to an hour before work, and I really, Romania is a huge thing, and I'm taking it pretty seriously. It's a pretty big financial effort, and it's a pretty big like time endeavor, and I'm lucky enough to have a super supportive wife who is cool with both of those things, and a job that's cool with me leaving. So I'm really kind of like not holding anything back on this one.
That's good to know. First, I want to make the comment, like, I've had COVID twice, and everyone says this most recent round is awful. So I'm over here like, I'm not sure if I'm protected because I've had it twice, or it's just a matter of time.
It's funny because I was just thinking about it a few weeks before. I was like, nobody cares about COVID anymore. Like, it doesn't even matter. And then I get it, and it just drops me. It was so bad for a couple of days. I was just dead. So it's the lingering effects that are, I think, the most frustrating because they just, I mean, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's challenging just to keep sentences going.
Yeah, it's for me, obviously it's been almost 2 years now, I think. It, like you said, sinus congestion. I didn't sleep worth a shit because I was just so congested. It kept keep me awake, and like you said, brain fog, all that stuff was pretty rough. Second time wasn't nearly as bad, but it still was not, would not call it good. So,
I don't even want. I wasted so much time in the last 2 weeks. I don't even want to waste any more time. Like motorcycles.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally understand that. So, I guess first, unpack the Romaniacs thing, like, because I think you made the decision to do that a while ago. Walk some of us through that are even remotely thinking about doing it. Like, what goes into even getting in, and what are you trying to prepare for? Not physically yet, just the administrative side of it. What do you have to prepare for?
So Romaniacs, I hate to say it, but I'm kind of a follower. Like, if somebody's like, hey, I want to go do this crazy thing, I'll definitely go with, but I'm not really one to like spearhead a lot of things, especially something that far. And Corey from Camel ADV had been talking about it, but he obviously wanted to bring somebody, and me and Corey have a pretty similar attitude about where we want to ride and how hard we want to ride. And Corey's getting a little older, so he's kind of thinking of this as like his last hurrah, like do it now, before he can't. But he called me and he's like, I want to do Romaniacs and I want you to come with me, and it sells out, really quickly. So like, we have to do it now. And, I said something to Susan, and, of course, Susan's like super supportive with everything. And she was like, yeah, she was like, yeah, let's like, just do it. So, I went, and it's signing up for it. There's no restrictions. It's not like you don't need any credentials or anything. I mean, you don't even have to show prior races. You can sign up for it. I mean, the classes start at, I think it's gold, silver, iron, gold, silver, iron.
It's a bronze, iron, maybe.
No, gold, silver, bronze, iron, atom.
Oh, okay.
So Paul did iron, I believe, and he was the first twin cylinder adventure bike or twin cylinder bike to ever finish. So he finished and I think won, obviously, his class because he was the only one in it. And then there's Adam, but Adam is like a glorified trail ride. So we didn't really want to do that. And, we tried to watch some videos of iron and it looked pretty doable. I guess the biggest thing that we're understanding is that the hill climbs just go forever. They're just like miles long, just uphill. And then the same thing as the downhills. And there's a lot of traction. So it tends to be really steep. And the downhills are like, people like on dirt bikes literally walk their bike down the hills. Yeah. It's so steep. So sorry.
I don't know if you're going to make it, man.
Yeah, no, this has been my last like month. So I think that's going to be the most challenging part. I mean, it's 4 days plus a prologue, 120 clicks a day, roughly. And from our friend Radek did it last year in silver, and he rented a dirt bike. And he said it was like insanely harder than he ever imagined, but he also did silver. So basically, like, all the tracks kind of start in the same area, and then they branch off and they come back together, and they branch off and they come back together. So like silver and gold are like stuff that I probably wouldn't even touch on a regular dirt bike, but iron should be pretty doable. I've heard it's a lot of steep hills, steep downhills, but a lot of like off camber logs, and they get wet and they get really slick. And I've heard like last year it rained, and Radek was just like we thought we were holding a good pace, and we DNF'd every single day. Like they didn't even make it to the finish line every
Yeah.
single day because the rain was so aggressive last year. So I guess if it's dry, it's either super hot and dry with good traction, or it's just a like a rainy mess, which makes it insanely hard. So
Yeah, I did I did somewhat of a disservice to the listeners. We're talking about Red Bull Romaniacs. People don't know that already. I pulled up Red Bull TV actually at Thanksgiving. I was I was at the in-laws' place, and they had the game on and all this other stuff, and so everybody was just kind of paying attention to that. So I went out in the garage, flipped on Red Bull TV, and was like
just by
watching.
yourself, you just went
Yeah,
out there and
I
hung
was
out.
just
Oh
sitting
my
there
gosh!
watching the recap for the Hard Enduro series, getting caught up because I hadn't watched it yet, and I caught that
Wow.
piece right because I forget who the leader was at that point. It was it was probably Letton Bickler and Bolt and a couple other guys that were out front, and that was exactly it. They were
Yeah,
like, "Hey, if they
I
make it
think
through
Letton
this
Beckler
section
won
before it
that.
rains," so yeah, he
Yeah.
just dominated the season. So for the listeners' benefit, if you're even remotely into dirt bikes, even if you're not into hard enduro, just pull up Red Bull TV and go back and watch some of the hard enduro stuff. It's some of the best dirt bike stuff you can
Romaniacs
see.
is like the Dakar of hard enduro.
Mhm.
Is a good way to put it. It's super long days. It's multiple days in a row. It's one of the longest, hardest races you can do. I think some people say I'm going to be fine, and other people say I'm crazy.
Mhm.
I enjoy the challenge, and I've been putting in a lot of. Um, Obviously, the Ténéré has been constantly evolving based on what I want to do and how I ride it. So a lot of time and effort very recently, right before the Hard Enduro, actually, um, a lot of changes were made. And especially with me last season, post COVID, I noticed how much endurance and strength I lost, and I just never
Mhm.
really got it back. So I'm really focusing on that
Well,
this
rewind real
year.
quick. I mean, if I want to go race Red Bull Romaniacs, how much do I need to budget just to get in the race?
Yeah, I got sidetracked there, didn't I? If you want to fly and ride, you
Hmm.
need about 10 to 12 grand. There's
Okay.
companies that you pay, it's like 1,800 euro or something to have a team. They're mechanics. Um, Basically, you fly in, they pick you up. Your entrance fees cover a hotel. It covers you can do an option where you can get all your food covered too. So if you pay a
Yeah.
little extra, you can get all your food, and it's not that much extra. And then there's the bike rental. The From what I understand, you really have to have somebody maintain your bike because you're dead at the end of the day, and they have to
Yeah.
go over it and swap tires and sprockets. Also, your starting point, like where you where everyone gathers, like the bivouac, is in the middle of the city where there's
Hmm.
two big hotels that they rent out. And the starts tend to be they can be an hour away from the bivouac. So someone has to tote your bike to and from the starts and the finishes. And then
Yeah.
there's also like mid ride checkpoints where you can service your bike and get water and get snacks and take breaks and stuff. So without a team, I've heard it's insanely hard. I mean, I'm sure it's doable, but it's really hard. So I've heard about 10 to 12 grand if you fly, rent a bike, rent a team, pay for the experience. I'm guessing because I have to take my bike because you can't really rent a Tenere
Yeah.
out there. It's gonna be I have to wait for flight information for shipping the bike, but it's probably gonna be somewhere in the neighborhood of like 15 to 17, I
Yeah.
want to say.
That's what I figured you were going to end up spending. I'm just holding my thumb in the air, just guessing, 3 grand ish alone just to get the bike shipped over there one way or another. Maybe 4 grand. I don't know. I think it was
Well,
3,500 ish back in the day, but then we were talking about boats, not airplanes and all that other stuff.
well, I got to get it from Chicago to Toronto. From Toronto, it goes on Air Canada. From Air Canada, it goes to I want to say somewhere in Italy,
Yeah, it's a big
and
deal.
then someone picks it up in Italy, brings it to Romania for me,
Yeah.
and then reverse. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of logistics. I'm really nervous. Susan's really good at that stuff. I think I'm nervous financially. I'm nervous to show up and do a crap job. I think a lot of people get the idea that I'm like a super confident person, and
Yeah.
the reality is I'm actually not. I'm very cautious and hesitant, and I definitely get in my head a lot when it comes to something um, as daunting as this. So I feel lucky to have people in my corner that um, are able to help support those ideas.
I can back that up a little bit, obviously, because I enjoyed the 7 hour race. I guess we could touch on that to some degree, right? Like I
Which one?
enjoyed the 24. I did enjoy the 24 hour race I had done before, and I'm like, I want to go ride dirt bike. Let's go ride 7 hours or whatever it was. And your
Yeah,
attitude at the start was perfect, right? Like you and I were sitting there talking about some of that stuff. Like, this takes more endurance than people might think, combined with you're like, this is a long race. I'm not running to my bike. I am walking
yeah.
because it doesn't make sense.
Okay, well, we'll have to repack that real quick because no one knows what we're talking about. So at the 7 hour, which I've always wanted to do, a 24 hour, I just never gotten on a team, and I've never really pushed. But at the 7 hour that me and Drew did together, the start is, what do they call that? Like
Le Mans start. You
a
have
Le
to
Mans
run to the
start.
bike. Yeah.
So you run to the bike, you jump on it, you start it, and you go. And I'm like, this is a 7 hour race. Like I'm not
Yeah.
running to the bike and like risking binning it off the start. Like, so I kind of skipped to the bike as a joke, but ironically, I made it, sorry, I made it like probably, I don't know, 300 yards, and I made it into the river, and there was a really slick wet rock, and the front end just tucked, and I went down hard on my shoulders. So that was pretty ironic twist.
That was an interesting way to start that race. Obviously, some of the listeners have been to the holler before, but obviously for those that don't, I mean, there's a giant creek that literally runs right down the middle. I mean, that's how the holler's made, right? And so we have raced in and out of that creek quite a bit, and there's some sections of it that are sketchy AF. Like,
I mean, those
that
rocks,
was it.
they get moss on them, and they're just glass, and I just happened to be just like the front tire hit, and it just jackknifed like
Yeah,
instantly.
I
And
think it
that
was.
was, man, I had a lot of challenges that 7 hour, and then I
Yeah,
had a lot of challenges the next time I went to the holler for
yeah,
that race. But shit, what did I have? I had a tire spin, a moose get soft that was like 2 years old, and I should have known
yeah,
better. And I didn't realize there wasn't a wheel lock in there. That's how little I ride that two
yeah,
stroke. And so the tire, I would be like hauling ass. I'd go to hit the brakes, and the front end would just wash. And I was trying to figure out what was going on, and I realized the moose was soft, and there was no wheel lock, and the tire was just
yeah,
spinning on the rim. So I'd hit the brake, the tire would just spin, and I wouldn't
mhm,
actually stop, and the front end would tuck, and I would go down, and Derek was behind me and saw it happen like 4 times. Swapped a tire, put a tube and a tire in there, pinched the tube. The next time I went out, came back, put another tube in there. So like every time that you went out,
yeah,
I had to fix my bike for the entire time that you were
yeah.
out for 7 hours.
No, it was a wild race with respect to that. Obviously, we've changed topics on the listeners, so I'm sorry for random potpourri. But you've got Drew and Andy on the show, so I'm sorry. We probably should all be
Yeah,
prepared for this mess.
yeah.
Anyway,
Well, no, we were talking about the NE, where I mean that or
yeah,
the
it's all
24.
relevant, right?
The 7 hour. We're talking about the seven
But
hours, so it's good.
yeah, I think I got to kind of relax a little bit at first, and I had barely ridden the dirt bike. I was so out of shape. But that was exactly it. As both of us were spending a bunch of time maintaining the bike, which was much more than I had done when I raced 24 hour on the same bike. I was like, I barely did anything to that thing. I like put gas in it, but during this race, I forget what I was even fixing. But yeah, there was some dumb shit going on for me as well. So
Well, didn't
there's
that
that
bike
piece.
break like right after the race too?
Oh yeah, that's right. I took it home from the 7 hour, and I washed it, and then I went. I must have started, did whatever, and put it in the garage. And I went to start it again after the fact, and then this sprag clutch is locked up, and so if you kick the starter, sorry, if you hit the start button, then the actual starter doesn't disengage. So if you kick it, it's dragging the starter and all that stuff. So I've
Wow.
spent a pretty penny on the replacement parts for that. I'm not happy about it. But all the parts are in the garage. I just have to get off my ass and go in there and take it apart. I got a debate. I bought there's an intermediate gear. So you got a sprag clutch and then the intermediate gear and then the flywheel and stuff. I'm told I should replace the intermediate gear, but I have to take flywheel off, and I'm asking myself, do I want to get a special tool to do that or just let it ride? So we'll see.
I might have the tool. I don't know if the 2-stroke and the 4-stroke tool are the same, but it's just a threaded piece that threads onto the flywheel, and then you just press it off. Yeah, I have one of those if you need it.
Yeah. So no,
I'll ship it to you.
I gotta figure. I figure I put it on there. So I gotta do that.
Or just bring it over here. I don't have any bikes to fix right now. All my bikes are out of town, so just bring it over here. I got time.
You saw it. That 7 hour, it was smoking pretty good. And so I'm like, so I got valve seals for it. Hopefully the actual valve guides are still decent. It's just the seal, so we'll see. But I got to take it apart, and I'm gonna rebuild the forks because I know how much you love the forks on my bike. They're way overdue. And I think I blew the shock in that race. Not positive, but that shock probably did about 6 races, and it's already jacked. So I'm not happy.
Oh, I can't wait till you ride my Ténéré. You're never gonna want to get on another bike ever again. You're gonna understand what I was talking about your forks. It's insane.
Challenge accepted. We'll see how that goes because obviously we're both tuning at this point. So I guess that's a wonderful segue. Do you want to recap the KXCR Hard Enduro and discuss what you learned from that, or talk about what you did to the bike and then talk about KXCR Hard Enduro?
Well, I mean, not everything was done at KXC Hard Enduro,
Right.
so I think let's go over KXC Hard Enduro. Let's start with a segue of that Ténéré, like we talked about, it's been evolving, right? So I had the stock suspension came off of that bike, and I put the Öhlins Andy Janik kit on, which is supposed to be 220 mil travel front and rear. The bike stocks 200, and it was a night and day difference just from that, but I was still finding myself out riding it. There was some sort of imbalance. I was constantly trying to get the rear lower and get the front higher, and the front forks were really stiff and the rear shock was really soft. And it had been 2 years I had that kit on the bike, and the company who I purchased from was in the process of selling to someone else, and so they never really had time to get it back in, and I wanted to get it sprung and valve, but it just was never happening. And I happened to meet the guys at MX Tech, and they happened to be right at the tail end of prototyping some full front and rear suspension for the Ténéré, and they were specifically building it for Damon Bradshaw, an ex-pro racer who lives out in Idaho. And he was out of town for the next couple of months, but I was around, and they're only an hour from me. Like, they didn't know I was here, and I didn't know they were working on a Ténéré suspension. So, I brought the Ténéré over, and I talked to Adam, and me and Adam hung out for like weeks, every weekend, bring the Ténéré over, pulling the shocks, pulling the forks, dissecting his forks, dissecting my Öhlins forks and the shock, and getting dimensions and getting numbers. And, they're really awesome. They 3D scan everything, and they design everything in CAD in-house, and they have a 5-axis CNC and a lathe, and they make all the parts in-house. They make the shock bodies, they make the tops, they make the bottoms, they make the fork caps, they make the lower legs. The only thing that they're buying is the tubes. I think I want to say they're Showa tubes.
That's what I was.
They're not say. KYB. And they're 49 millimeter forks. And so we built a set of prototypes, and my bike has the first set of prototypes on there. First, I got the shock. So the shock, we can make anywhere from stock height to plus 25 millimeters. We built me a plus 25 millimeters. The forks weren't ready yet. So when I raced the Hard Enduro, I just had the new shock and my original forks. And already, not my original forks, my Öhlins forks. So already the bike felt a lot better. Because when we took apart the Öhlins stuff, we found out there was some things that weren't set up right. And granted, they were going to revalve and respring it, so it's no kind of beating them up at all. It just they hadn't had time to do it. But getting the shock sprung properly and valved for me was such a game changer. The shock and the forks too also have what's called a huck valve in it, which is an extra valve that you can tune for extra bottoming resistance that only comes in like that last, I think it's like 30 or 40% of travel, it kicks in an extra valve to stiffen it up, which is huge.
Yeah, I'm sure the listeners have probably caught up to it at some point. I think I was, my buddy Mark flipped the script, right? Like, I think you just listened to that episode as the time that we're recording this, right? But, Mark talked to me about the bike and some other stuff. And so I've got quite a bit of tuning. And I guess for listeners that don't know, I mean, that's a thing. You start putting suspension components on a bike that weren't stock, didn't come from the factory, and you're in a population of, let's say, like 10, 100 people that have done it. Like, it's hard telling how it's going to shake up when you first put it on the bike. So
and it was a cool experience to go, because I could go with Adam, and Adam has got so much knowledge, and it's hard to find a suspension guy that like wants to sit and wants to watch and wants to like learn. Like, normally you call them, you give them some specs, you give them your weight, right? They throw some stuff together, and then you call them and you're like, I hate this. And they're like, I don't know, turn the clickers. Like, suspension's a really challenging game, because you can build, you can have 10 guys the same weight, similar riding style, like similar speed, right? And you could build the same suspension 10 ways for 10 guys, and one could love it and the other 9 could hate it.
Yep.
It's a very personal thing, and not a lot of people understand balance, and they tend to just soften everything. So Adam was really great, because I would just go over there and I would just ride the bike, and he would see what it was doing, and he knew how it was acting. So when we put the shock on and we raced the Hard Enduro, I mean, unfortunately I only got about a mile literally to test it. And it was feeling really good up until that point. And I was doing a hill climb, and I made it like 90% of the way up this hill climb. And, I'm so mad. I should have just tried to finish going up it, because Seth was there to help me, but I didn't. I turned the bike around and I went to ride it down the hill, and it started to fall. So I just kind of like let it go, and it just was kind of sliding normally down the hill. I had just put some new foot pegs on there to test out, and I was worried they were a little too big, and they were aluminum, and one of them caught a rut in the ground or a root or something, and it caught it, snapped the foot peg, flipped the bike, snapped the tower. I was so pissed. I broke my foot peg a mile in. So I didn't really even get to test the suspension.
Maybe.
Luckily, Drew was there, and I was so pissed. I was like, I really wanted to do this Hard Enduro. I really wanted to ride. It was me and Drew and Seth. Seth was on his 890, and Drew was on his 350. And you were on that 2-stroke that you bought.
No, I wanted to set the stage for that. Yeah, let me do that. In case you got a cough off the microphone, right? I guess I should say that, like, so I've talked about the hauler quite a bit. Others have as well. So we love it there, obviously. And they decided, I had sent some things to AJ, but I mean, AJ and Derek both know the hauler really well. And so AJ tied in all the hard stuff. But as soon as we started riding, it didn't take me long at all to figure out where we were going. And so when we came to the hill you're talking about, I'm like, oh, dude, that hill scares the shit out of me going down. So I knew we got there. I think I can do this, whatever it was. But it's funny, because like I said, I was just a soup sandwich. I've been on my ass for months. But yeah, my buddy Mike at Ride Northern Kentucky. So shout out to Ride Northern Kentucky. They're a sponsor of Red River Scramble. And he's like, you on the Hard Enduro? I'm like, nah, I don't want to blow my 350 up. He's like, well, you can come get my 2-stroke. I'm like, I don't know, man. I'm going to beat the hell out of it. He's like, nah, come get it. It's not doing anything else. I'm like, I'm not going to ask a second time, right?
What a nice guy. To do a Hard Enduro on someone's bike is a lot.
Yes. I mean, to the listeners' credit, I mean, if you haven't gone back and listened, Mike was a guest on the show a couple episodes ago at the time of recording this. So go back and listen to that. Mike's a cool guy. Mike went to, what is the Motorcycle Institute or whatever it was, became a mechanic, and is now the general manager of Ride Northern Kentucky. And they're KTM, Gas, Royal Enfield, Indian, like the whole smash. But yeah, he's like the most low key dude. I had no idea he even worked at a dealership, right? Like, his buddy Jason is how I kind of met him, and Jason got him to come to the scramble. And Jason's like, a big personality. And Mike's like totally chill. Hell, he gave me his 890 to ride for the day at the scramble this year. So I rode the 890 around all day. And that's it.
The 890 is a fun bike.
Yeah, I think the conditions I rode it under were not fair to the bike. I just had the new shocks put on mine, and I'm a real sucker for character. To some degree, the 890 makes things too easy, but that's a whole other, like, I didn't want to turn this into a podcast about taste and listen to Drew and Andy bitch about performance versus taste. So I also wanted to say at the Hard Enduro, I wanted to have Seth Haley on the show. So hopefully the listeners will catch up with Seth on the show at some point later.
Yeah.
Because Seth's, you two guys just decided, I think you guys had decided to do it. And I was on the fence, like, I don't want to.
I decided to do it. I hit Seth up and I was like, do you want to do it? Because I love riding with Seth. He's a good rider. He's faster than me in the fast flowy stuff, but I'm a little bit better in the technical, and part of that has to do with bike, and part of that just has to do with our riding style. Like he's just a fast rider.
I want to throw out there as well. What was that? First round last season? First round this season? First round this season. It's a slab. We'd never been there before. You and I are getting up to the line. Susan's there, and all of a sudden there's this dude that shows up on an 890. We're like, sweet, we got a new guy in the club. And it turns out like Seth's like our new homie, right? Like,
yeah, I love that. He's awesome.
Yeah, so this Hard Enduro story is great because that's exactly, it's like we have no idea who this dude is, and all of a sudden we're like, oh wow, we found a dude that's as crazy as we are.
Yeah, so he really enjoys the challenges, and he wants, like, wherever I want to go, he wants to go, which is super, super refreshing and rare because no one ever wants to go.
Yeah. Yeah. Eventually I'll find a bike I care less about, and we can beat that up. But I think I need a truck first, but we'll see how that plays out. So anyway,
I flipped a bike down a hill. It was so stupid too, because like I made it like 90% up the hill. There was just like, so for the listeners, it's really steep and it's not bad at the bottom, but as you get up, it's a lot of roots that are exposed from washouts and rain, and they're just all over the place. They're left, they're right, and they're all they're not across the trail, they're at angles on the trail, and they're all a little wet. So you're like riding up this, and the last like 2/3 of it is just kicking you and throwing you and left and right. So I got caught on those roots, right? And the bike, tumbled down the hill, and I was super bummed, and I'm like, I'm not giving up. Like, I really wanted to be here. I really want to try. Like, I want to finish. I have to finish. And, Seth went ahead and he wanted to try and get me a foot peg. So Seth rode on, and Drew stayed with me, and I made it up the hill the second attempt, but I didn't just do it without a foot peg, because I didn't just break the foot peg like a little bit. It snapped completely off. Like, it was totally gone. Like, at the hinge pin, it snapped in half. So, and I don't know if you know the Ténéré, but like the mount for the foot peg is a bolted on piece of this deal that's excuse me, is
Cough
a bolted on
is getting
piece
liberal use today, kids. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. The mount for the foot peg is a stamped piece of steel that's on an angle with a big like 1/2-inch radius on the edge. So it's not really something you can easily stand on. So I'm whipping out my backpack and I'm just ripping around things like, what can I throw in here? And I grab my KTM kit pliers that come with the dirt bike, and I just clamped it to the peg pin and then threw a bunch of zip ties on it. And I had a giant loop strap, and I just yanked that sucker and strapped it on there. And I'm like, all right, I'm good. We're going. Like, we're finishing this race. And I couldn't really like load it because the pliers would bend and they would slide down.
To the listeners' benefit, I'm sitting up on top of the hill because I'm fat and lazy, and I'm just sitting up there like, Andy, what the hell are you doing? Like, get on this bike and ride it. I thought you were adjusting your suspension the whole time. I'm like, good God, I know it's a new shock, but holy shit, a couple clicks and let's do this.
Yeah, I'm sitting at the bottom of the hill for like 10 minutes, and Drew's like, what are you doing? And like, finally, like, I rip up the hill, and he looks down, and there's literally a pair of pliers just like clamped onto the bottom of my bike. He's like, what the heck?
Well, you got up on top of the hill and you kept going. And I'm like, all right, I guess I'll have to get on this dirt bike and ride it. And I chased you up the hill and you stopped because you were way up there at that point, because that was that pivot point where we went around. I think they actually made the pros go up, straight up from that point where I met you. And that's where you're like, my peg's broke. And I'm like, oh, that explains what you were doing.
Yeah, so that was really challenging because it was kind of damp, and there was a lot of logs, and there was a lot of big rocks and a lot of things to jump. So like, for anybody who's familiar with like going over obstacles, you have to like full body weight, like, lift your body up, weight your body's weight into the suspension, and as the suspension rebounds or comes back up, like you're using the gas and using the clutch, and you're trying to loft that front end over things. Well, it's really freaking hard to like weight the suspension on a 500-pound bike with no right foot peg.
Yeah.
So like I'm just running into things and hoping I make it over it. And a lot of these logs are wet and they're at angles, and some of them were like 12 inches. They were massive. So it was an extremely hard thing to do. And there was a couple times I fell and I was just so tired. And like, luckily Drew was there to help me. And like, he picked up the bike 2 or 3 times. And I was just, I don't know if I would have made it as far without you. And then we made it probably like 3 miles into it. And we come up on this ravine, like legit a ravine. And guys were going left and guys were going right. And we look down and we just see Seth standing there in the ravine, right in the middle of the ravine, right? And I think he was just hauling ass. And he just went head first in this ravine. The bike tumbled head over heels. And the bike was like sideways wedged in the ravine. And Seth was just standing there with his arms on his hips like, ugh. He had been there for a while too.
Yeah, that situation's tough. I got to recap this, because the reality is what my favorite parts of the hard enduro that we saw, which I still think is probably 3/5, maybe 4/5 of the entire course, were the top of the ridge line. Because that's it. Like we got up that hill and we're going up on top of the ridge line, and you and I are working together to get through that mess. And hat tip or tip for the listeners, like I've said it before, electrical tape in the toolkit goes a long way.
Yeah.
that saved the day, because all those
pliers were coming off.
Yeah, they weren't staying on there. I was like, well, dude, I got tape. Let's make this damn zip tie not go anywhere. Right?
So what Drew's saying is the pliers, and I had this like giant loop strap holding the pliers on, but it kept sliding. So we took his electrical tape and we literally just taped around the entire set of pliers like 8 million times. Right. And that made it the rest of the hard enduro. Those didn't fall off until we had bailed out and we were on our way back. They fell off somewhere in the woods. But dude, getting Seth out was a bitch though. Seth's bike was so wedged, it took all 3 of us to like pick it up and drag it backwards.
I wanted to throw in that point there. You and I had talked before the race that you weren't going to wear your Wolf Enduro kit because you needed to keep it light. And I actually think that was a smart choice on your part. It was just ironic that I was Drew the tool guy because I had nothing else. I'm like, nah, I hate being without my tools.
Well, I still had all the tools I normally bring. I just don't usually bring electrical tape.
Fair enough.
Like so, I had everything else.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So Seth has, I don't remember what year his 890 is, but it's still the Insectoid KTM. It's not the newest version that has the side supports and everything. So his tower and everything is like wedged in there, and we're freaked out that if we push the bike the wrong way or pick it up the wrong way, it's just going to smash it. So
Seth doesn't care. He's just like, pull it, yank it. Like, awesome.
This is one of those times where he said, hey, no, let's not pick it up this way or that way. Cause he really was worried that he was going to tear off the front. I remember
was he? I don't remember
distinctly.
that.
Yeah. I distinctly
Holy
remember
cow.
that. I'm sitting here trying to ask myself, did somebody get a toe strap? Didn't that happen? Like somebody grabbed a toe strap out of a bag or something. Somebody had something weird.
I think Seth did. And I think we tried to like pull it up because it was aimed like downhill, like wedged into, this was like a nasty washout ravine and it was stuck on like wedged up high on each side, but like upside down. That was gnarly. He must have been booking because the top of that ravine was 40 or 50 feet from where he was.
Yeah. I'm just glad he
didn't get hurt.
Yeah.
That was gnarly.
Yeah, that's what getting this bike out of there. And we still had a couple spots because I think you were trying to figure out how to put your foot on the rear brake and some other stuff because it was still rocky and really steep through there. So I remember you struggling through that. And they were just stupid little sticks. Not big ones. The 2-inch diameter sticks were just in the wrong way, and they were just making the wheels go everywhere. It sucked.
Yeah, that is true. That was my right foot peg that broke. So, trying to use I couldn't even find the rear brake half the time. Yeah. So, what I would do is I would kind of, put my heel, on the peg, which was just a pair of pliers. And the problem is I couldn't load it because they were bending down a lot, and they were just trying to rip off the peg bolt. So I was kind of lightly loading it, and then I was kind of loading my front toe on the brake pedal when I could find it, and then just using it for some sort of stability. And downhill, sometimes I didn't find that rear brake, it was sketch.
No, it's
those were some really cool, like the ridges that we rode and the rock gardens that we went in through. It's stuff I've never seen at the Holler.
Yeah.
That I really want to go back and do again. We did do that one section that we did at the 7 hour, that one uphill climb that led us into the woods and the rocks again. And that was pretty, but I think the gnarliest part especially was that river section that we got into. That was where it really, nothing was really, like if I had a peg, it would have been fine, but nothing was really super challenging until that point.
Yeah. But I want to paint the terrain for people who don't know. Obviously, Red River Gorge is my favorite place to be. And it really is because these just sheer cliffs are completely hidden by all the trees and whatnot. Like you see them peeking out from behind the trees and whatnot. But for folks that are used to, North Carolina, Tennessee, and some other stuff, they've not seen some of this stuff. But they're all over the place down there. And the Holler is that way, that when you roll in, they just look like hills. It's not that big a deal. But when you finally get closer, especially in the wintertime, you're like, holy shit, there's like 50-foot cliffs all around us. Like, yeah, that's a big deal. And the terrain changes dramatically as you climb that stuff, right? Like at the bottom, it's clay and this, that, and the other. But as you start to get closer and closer to the cliffs, it's all these like loose rocks and stuff, and like you can't find traction anywhere because you're just spitting rocks every which way. And yeah, that stuff changes. But to your point, yeah, we come down some parts of the racetrack and stuff we've done before, and then we start following that creek line, and we jump down in that creek. And you're right, now it's like, okay, you're at the head of the Holler, and they want us to climb out the creek, up toward the cliff, and it was just this
basically up a waterfall.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's this cascading limestone waterfall. Yeah, and there's so much clay, and so many dirt bikes had been through it by the time we were there. It was all polished. Like I was just totally gassed, and I'm on a dirt bike, but I was just soup sandwich. Like I was struggling to get up anything on a two-stroke. I'm like, I got nothing.
Dude, once we got in that mud section, I saw the first. So basically, when you start the race, it kind of like cruises. It goes a little bit uphill, and you're kind of slowly climbing the whole time, right? Winding around, hitting rocks, doing some uphills, right? And then you start about halfway through the race, you finally start to come downhill, and then you hit this river, right? And the first big obstacle in this river is like no joke. It's like a 3-foot tall pair of like 3 logs that had fallen against each other, and we're just sitting there, and it was a mud pit, and people on dirt bikes are just like hitting it and launching it and like falling left and falling back and falling right. And I think the first time I hit it, I nailed it, and then I like teetered on the skid plate, and then it rolled slowly backwards, and I fell back. And the second time I nailed it, and then there was one other obstacle. I nailed that one, but it was, dude, that was a struggle for a lot of people getting over those obstacles. And then after you get through that section, it's the second checkpoint. So we made it to the second checkpoint out of, I think the next checkpoint was the finish, right?
That's what I was told, though. Unfortunately, we're doing the
and then after that,
I don't know.
You kind of snake up the river a little bit more, and then you do the last challenging obstacle, which was like a windy rock garden uphill that's like a riverbed, basically uphill, to a rock garden at the top, to where there's like a narrow space to fit through. Yeah. I did find a line to go around it, and I was on the way up there, but unfortunately what ended up happening was Seth's bike was just physically too wide to fit through some of those areas. And we wasted a lot of time trying to get his bike through that. But by the time that we kind of got his bike finally out of there, it was, the next bit was so technical and so challenging. I'm not even sure his bike would have fit where it needed to go. So we just decided to go back before it got dark. Because at that point I had done, did I have the headlight delete on there?
I don't know. You were holding your windshield on the back of your backpack. So I don't know if the lights were working on that or not. I had a headlight. I don't remember if you had a headlight or not, because we did debate.
I didn't have a headlight.
Yeah, we were debating who even had a headlight.
I had the rear shock, and I built my headlight delete kit. So I had the tower that I just built. Yeah. So I pulled the headlight, which is 5 pounds, and I built an aluminum tower that's only like a couple of pounds. So that's why another reason I didn't want to go, because I would have gone. I was thinking about going by myself, but I had no headlight.
As of this moment talking to you, I don't remember this Andy in that creek. You, to me, struck me as hell-bent on wanting to fix it, that I was almost begging you, like, dude, we're going to get hurt if we
I
keep
wanted
going.
to finish so
Yeah.
badly, but I did not want, like, in the beginning of the race, I was like, we're not, like, we're all, at least to Seth and I was
Yeah.
like, we're sticking together. And
Yeah.
I did not want to leave Seth in there. And I also did not want to go up that alone without a headlight.
Right.
Because if I got in a pinch, those are rocks. And if I got stuck,
Yeah.
like, if the bike fell on me, I was stuck. And it was doable. I'm 95% sure I could have done it. But had there been an issue, I would have probably needed someone to help me
Yeah.
get out of a jam. And you were dead.
Oh, it was wasted.
Seth's bike was trashed. He was dead. There was another guy who's actually racing in Romania, who's racing iron, and he was thinking about going, but even he was like, I'm dead. And he was on a dirt bike, and he wasn't making, like, I had made it up some stuff, and I was like another 100 feet up
Yeah.
trying to help you guys through. And even he couldn't make it up some of the stuff I was already up, which was interesting to me.
That's something we should paint that picture as well, right? So it's a 4-hour hard enduro at the Holler. Like I said, I know the terrain, but I'd never competed in that stuff. And I'd not ridden a dirt bike. I'd not been doing much of anything. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just painting a picture. I had the water that was in my Camelback, but that was it. And I was freaking out about that. Like, after the fact, I'm like, dude, after I get to 4 hours, I don't know what I'm going to do. So, Seth's wife saved my life, man. She hit me with like a hydration gel pack and like poured some water in my Camelback or something like that. But that was something really
there was
to
a
think
whole
about.
slew of people there in that river watching.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Like, there we are. We get to the checkpoint just before the 4-hour mark, so we can technically continue. But we're in that creek, and it's like 4:30, and it's like it's November. Like, I think that was like the first day of the time change. That was the day after or something like that. And I'm like, dude,
we had about 45 minutes a day.
Yeah, like it gets dark,
and we're in the
early
woods,
in the
like
Harlem.
the deep woods of Kentucky.
Yeah, like
there's no light.
No, it was already like legitimately dark. Sorry, it was like legitimately beginning to feel very twilight, and it was like 4:30. Right, it's a big deal. So that was it was my concern. Is I'm like, I don't know why, other than not doing anything, but I was cramping up. Like, I was really struggling just to help you guys at that stage.
I wanted to finish so badly, and I was beating myself up, but I'm like, I can't. Like, it's not a good idea. Don't leave your friends. Like, don't be a dick. Like, it's just a race. Like,
you got to
do what you got to do.
You and I debated it. I don't know if it was text after, if it was sitting there in the creek or whatever it was. But that was why I said I wanted to do that podcast, because people in the adventure space and even the dirt bike space buy all kinds of stuff to put on their bike for all kinds of contingencies. But I wanted to kind of go through the list with you. Like, what have you done to the Ténéré that you thought you needed to do to adventurize and harden it? What are the things that you realized are not important? And what are the things that you've learned that you still need?
So, yeah, that's a great question, because I am constantly testing and tuning parts, and like buying things and putting them on and thinking it's going to be great, and then taking them off. And then, for a long time I was running that AXP skid plate, and I loved it, the plastic skid plate. And it was really, really, really good for a long time. Where I ended up in a sticky situation in Moab is, that bike has lower frame rails, right? But they're kind of flexible, and they're just kind of bolt-on add-ons, and they're literally just to hold the skid plate to give it structure, right? Well, when you have a plastic skid plate, if you take a really hard impact, like say a rock in Moab, the skid plate actually flexes. And because the skid plate flexes and that rail is pretty soft, the rail flexes. So the bolt that holds the skid plate on it flexed enough to puncture a hole in the side of my oil pan when my bike took a really hard side hit. So I love the AXP skid plate. For most people, I think it's an awesome option because it's extremely lightweight. It's very durable. For me, if I'm riding hard rock sections, I went back to the camel skid plate, which I have lined with a piece of UHMW, which is basically plastic that you can buy for $20 like my master car. And it has a beaver tail that covers up my my linkage.
Yeah.
So I run that. It's more weight than I want, but it's low weight, and I need the rigidity of the aluminum to prevent the frame rails from flexing. I just have to have it. So that's been a big one.
Let me let me tie into that real quick so we can stay on skid plates. My scrambler obviously is not an adventure bike by traditional terms, but you and I have the same situation. I got some pretty beefy frame rails on it, but ran into a similar story that you just told this year with the aluminum skid plate that they make from the factory, and there's not a lot of aftermarket options. So I did exactly what you just said. I cut a cutting board and threw it underneath there. For whatever it's worth to especially East Coast riders. I don't remember. I think you actually pointed this out the other day. I went ahead and spent the $10-12 on the whatever the sponge stuff is that they sell. Rocky Mountain, a couple different brands make it. It's like a big super expandable sponge. If you're going to ride in the mud a lot, I threw that in. So on my scrambler, I've got all that crap to keep the engine from getting completely caked in mud, and makes it a lot easier to clean out. Just kind of a convenience thing. But it was related to that whole story.
Yeah, I had somebody said actually the guys from Tracy Racing Society, which is Paul Terrace's crew. The last time I put a hole in my oil pan, it was my fault because I put a screw to hold my UHMW on, and I thought I was clear of the pan, but I was like right on the edge, and I took a hard hit in Arizona, and I put a little pinhole in it again. This is my fault, but they were like, put a piece of foam in there, and I was like, I will, but it was me this time. It was my idiot person putting a screw where I shouldn't have, not the bike. But the thing I love about the UHMW, which is the plastic on the bottom, and I've been preaching this for a while, and Corey from Camel ADV as an option on his. I finally convinced him on the Desert X skid plate. You can buy the skid plate, and then you can buy the UHMD slip liner as an add-on option. I developed that because I saw the plastic skid plates on the dirt bikes and I loved them, but I knew they couldn't hold up. And I had my big heavy Ducati, and the thought is you need the aluminum for the rigidity, but the aluminum dents and dings and it gets damaged and you can't really bend it back easily, right? And then things drag on it and slow you down. When you put the UHMD under there, it distributes the load over the aluminum, so the aluminum isn't damaged, and it glides over things smoothly. So you hit that log or that rock, and instead of stopping like instantly because you're dragging on aluminum and denting it, you glide over it, which has been a huge game changer. You lose about a quarter an inch ground clearance, but it's negligible in my opinion for the advantage of skid plate longevity and sliding over things. So that I think has been, if you want to ride basically enduro, hard enduro, rocks, anything gnarly on a big adventure bike, like beefing your skid plate is huge. And the problem with most adventure bikes is they have no frame rails.
Yes.
There's nothing down there. The engine is hanging. So basically you're mounting a skid plate to these long, crazy, messed up angular brackets that have no load carrying capability, and they twist and they bend and they move out of the way. And most adventure bikes, like the my old multi enduro and the new Transalp, they have these road shaped oriented oil pans that are sharp and pointy and long and not strong,
Yeah.
versus like the 890 and the Ténéré have a flat oil pan that is a little bit more conducive to not taking a hit and getting exploded. So
That's easily my number one complaint with the Transalp. You hit me in a tag, I think, today on Instagram, but yeah, like I really like the concept of the Transalp. I love Hondas, but I'm scratching my head. Like, I don't, why Yamaha is, doing an underbone frame with the frame support rails. Obviously, it's one of the things I love about my scrambler. I've seen Tigers run into this issue where people have broken oil pans and stuff because the bumpers that are under the skid plate just aren't heavy enough to handle a good drop on a hard rock. It's unfortunate.
well, I think at the end of the day, it's a volume issue. You've got a street bike engine, and you're going to sell way more street bikes, and you're going to sell adventure bikes. But how many people are going to ride them like we're going to ride them? And that's the problem. It's not a problem, but that is the quandary, especially when you're a Japanese manufacturer who's stretching everything super thin and trying to get every ounce of 15 years out of a DRZ 400. you know, a Honda 650. You know, you're trying to stretch timelines out of motorcycles to get all your pennies back.
I wrote a
But
note about that. Let's circle back to that after you talk about hardening an ADV bike. Keep going.
I was on a forum today maybe it wasn't a forum, it was Instagram, and I posted that picture with the Transalp to you, and a couple people commented on some guy like, this guy and this guy in YouTube proved that that's an irrelevant point. And I was like, it is for most people,
Right.
90%, 90 to 95% of adventure riders, it is probably not going to ever be a problem for them. But for me,
Yeah.
I'm going to break it off. Like I know it is. And one guy was like, well, you know, it's only got an inch less ground clearance than a Ténéré. And I was like, an inch is a lot when you're telling me the bike only has 6 inches of ground
Right.
clearance. So 6 inches to 7 inches, that's like a 15% increase. That's actually a pretty drastic increase. And an inch trying to get over a log could be the difference of getting over it with blowing a hole in your pan or not.
Well,
So
aside from that's what she said
tough.
jokes. I've raised the scrambler considerably, right? Like I have nearly 8 inches of ground clearance and came from 6. So I'm here to speak to you like, yeah, it's a huge deal, actually.
It's a big difference.
Like, and I'm not like, I mean, do I cross country race the scrambler? Sure. But it's not like super aggressive. I've done more aggressive things with that bike, just out adventure riding at Red River Scramble and so on and so forth. So I'm just saying, like, yeah, it's a big deal when you've ridden a bike with just 6 inches of travel and you step up to 7. You notice it very quickly.
Well, and I went and I checked the videos that these guys are talking about, and these are like guys who just do blogs.
Right.
And the guy was referencing a video where he was just driving. It was a gravel road and there was snow on it. And it was like an inch of snow. And he was like, see, it's such an off-road bike. It's great. And I was like, that's fine. Like, I understand where most people are coming from. The Transalp is a great bike, and it will be a great bike for most people. But if you want to push it, you're going to run into problems. Without one of the biggest selling points for the Ténéré for me was the lower frame rails for putting a skid plate on there. After coming off of the Ducati, which was a great bike, and I will say I've put 3 holes in the oil pan of my Ténéré, 2 of them because the skid plate flexed, 1 of them because I put a screw in the wrong location, right? So partially my fault, and I'm also riding it way harder and way gnarlier places. But I never put a hole in my oil pan on my Ducati, but I had to make my own skid plate from scratch that took me 6 months because no one made one.
Right.
And it was extremely challenging. So, and that was a bike that it didn't have an oil pan that bolted on. The oil pan is both engine halves.
Wow.
So if you blow the oil pan, it's both engine cases. You got to split the entire motor. So I was very, very concerned about damaging that pan. And I did some crazy stuff, and I took some hard hits, and luckily I built a strong enough skid plate that I never had an issue. But
it's a big deal. I mean, that's really, like I said, the Tiger owners are the ones that I know the most. You know, I'm a Triumph guy, we know. And I've seen how much that skid plate moves just by putting it on a jack. You know, a buddy came over to my house to change tires. We put it up on the jack, and I'm like, holy shit. Like, I can't believe how much these little bumpers compress just putting it on a jack, because there's no way to pick it up.
Skid plate?
Yeah. Like it's wild.
Well, it's paper thin, and there's these little pieces of rubber, and they actually push against the skid plate, which scares the shit out of me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, you need something. Like, you have to have some kind of cushion, because that's the reality. Even the Tiger XC skid plate, there aren't rails or anything. They don't bolt to any other part of the frame or anything else. It just bolts to the engine. So, like, you have to have some kind of cushion. Otherwise, those bolts are just going to go through the engine, right? And this isn't
when
rare.
I was actually looking at skid plates for my multi enduro, the only skid plates that I could find, you took out 2 mounting bolts that held in the stator and the clutch cover, and you bolted it to the engine cases with like 6mm bolts. I was like, no, I'm good. We're not doing that.
Well, and you and I have debated on previous episodes and still text from time to time. Like, the Touareg 660 is still the bike that is the hottest to me in this segment in my mind, right? Like, I really like that bike. I like the way it handles. I like the Ténéré's engine better, but I like the way that the Touareg rides. but its lack of, as you said, frame rails or underbone frame, whatever you want to call it, that's a problem for me, because I also like to go places that are harder. And that's one reason why I like the Scrambler the way it is.
Yeah.
So what else as far as hardening the bike?
So yeah, moving on. That was a long segue. So then
the skid plate episode.
So skid plate, super important. You know, we already know that I started with some Olin suspension. That was big. The next thing that I did was wheels. I took the stock hubs, shipped them to my buddy at Wheelworks, and he put a 1.6. Well, originally it was a 1.6 standard Takasago and a 2.5 Takasago in the rear with heavier duty Buchanan spokes. And I made it about a month before I turned the front wheel square, which is about how long the stock wheels lasted. So we had to upgrade that Takasago to an A60, which is basically a motocross front wheel. So even beefier spokes, even thicker wheel, even narrower than I had.
Yeah, hit me with the stock sizes. Do you remember what they were? Are they like
185 and 4.25 or 4.15? I can't remember.
I think it's 4.25 in the rear, for just holding my thumb in the air. But yeah.
So yeah, 2.5 in the rear, 1.6 in the front. That instantly made the bike more nimble. My tip-in was faster. I was able to put more aggressive tires on there. Now I'm still running, funny story, I'm still running the Shinko MX216, which I ran on the 4.25 or whatever wheel, and the 2.5 wheel just changes the profile.
Yeah.
But what I can run now is I can run Mooses, and they don't last long, but when I need them, they're phenomenal, and I never have to worry about flats, and I get insane traction. So I could run tubes. I just prefer the way I don't have to worry about Mooses like at all. The only trouble that I've had is because the bike is so heavy, and it's not so much of a big deal in the back of the bike, but in the front of the bike, when that moose in the front starts to die out and it gets flat spots in it, I actually feel it in the steering. So I'll be riding and it'll start, every time it rotates, it wants to like turn the bike on me, which is really, really, really tough in slow technical terrain. So I've spent way too much money experimenting with mooses and moose sizes and wedging and all this stuff. And I have a system down now that I think is really good. And I have some sizing down now that I'm happy with, that I think I'm going to run with in Romania. And I think I'm actually going to build another set here for Romania, just so I have a brand new fresh set.
Wheels?
Just to eliminate issues of wheels. Yeah, but I think I'm going to go full hubs, just a full build.
That's a good way to do it.
Just because I don't want to risk it. I mean, I'm spending so much money to go there. So yeah, wheels. Crash protection. I tried a couple different kinds of.
Let me back up for a second, because I think the listeners will benefit from this. Obviously, you and I harangue about tires, tubes, and that other stuff, and other people have heard me talk about it. Excuse me. I want to mention that.
Yeah, Susan was giving you some shit today about your stupid tire comment.
True story. It was so good. I'm like, I don't even remember that comment. Now I need to know what the context was.
It was
it was solid. I'm obviously an ultra heavy duty tube guy versus mooses. Just, I don't know, cost, convenience, what I'm used to. We can call it whatever. But I believe firmly that there's a huge difference. So like if you could run a light duty tube, you get more feel, but then you have a pinch flat issue. You get better feel with a moose, and typically that's better, but they're a pain in the ass to put in there. They may or may not last as long. To me, ultra heavy duty tubes is a great compromise. They're cheap, they're easy to put in, but your feel is shit. Like the front end is like dead, but it's really hard to get a flat. It's not flat proof like a moose is, but it's good. So I just want to throw that out there for listeners. Like, hey, there's options, and it really depends on your budget, your skill level, like how serious you want to get. Because I mean, mooses are going to set you back what, $200 for a set?
Oh, more than that.
Right.
It depends on who you go with. Whether you're going with there's Pirelli, there's Golden Tire, there's
Nitro Moose,
Michelin, and then there's Nitro Moose. And I've tried the Michelins and the Nitros, and the Michelins are the most expensive, but I've had the best luck with them. Those mooses are about $180 a piece.
That's why I wanted to mention that I'm like, ultra heavy duty tubes are $20.
And I don't ride on the street.
Yes.
I don't ride road. I don't ride highway. You can't ride on you can't ride street with a moose. So I mean, I know a lot of guys that do rally. When they practice, they run mooses when they race, and they run just tubes when they're
Yeah.
practicing because it's so expensive. I'm still trying to figure out what I like and what works for me, and I finally have a system. And when I most likely build my second set of wheels, I will probably have, tubes and different tires in those, and then I'll probably have my other wheels that'll probably be mooses and the most
Yeah.
aggressive tires I can put on there, just because that's going to be more advantageous for me. And I do want to do some bigger, longer rides. Like Susan wants to do a
Yep.
BDR and some BDRXs. So I want to be able to do that. And with my current setup, I just can't with a moose.
No, it makes sense. While you're hitting the cough button, I'm going to do a live show correction, apparently. So Susan's teasing me about saying slow down on the street with DOT tires. And I don't even remember that comment, but it's like I've ran non-DOT tires like Shinko 505s, and I ride like a complete idiot on the street. So I don't remember what I was talking about when I said that. But the reality is, to me,
You were talking about tires and DOTs, and you were talking about like that you can ride so much faster with DOT tires on the street. And I was like, dude,
really? Wow, I must have been drinking
yeah,
pretty heavy at that point talking to Mark.
I think you were. And that's I always tell people this in our classes, whenever I can preach this, right? Having a really aggressive tire off road that doesn't last long is a huge advantage. You will drop your bike less, you will have more fun, you will break less things, you will break yourself less, right? Having a knobby on the road isn't that big of a disadvantage because you're not Mark Marquez. You have to follow rules and speed limits, and there's cars, and like you really can't push it on the road. And I would say I can ride just as fast on knobbies on the road as most people, the average rider, can ride with regular street tires. It's not like it's this misconception. The only thing that you're going to get is mileage.
Your premise is correct. And for all I know, I meant to say one thing and something else came into my mind at the time, or my mouth.
I'm not beating you up. This is just
you and I have covered that
like,
exact topic with what you just said. My point was only that, like, I think the average consumer that buys knobby tires, the knobbier the tire, the more that they naturally slow down on the pavement. Like that just happens, right? And so that's my point is like, if you buy a DOT tire, like a Tusk D Sport Adventure or a Shinko 805, people will feel more comfortable. Even if it's not real, they feel more comfortable. That's really my point.
Which is fine. Go slower on the street anyways. You don't need to be hauling ass on the street.
I disagree with you on that, but yes.
I just stay away from the road.
Right.
The road. Well, and we're also in very different. I'm in Chicago. The road sucks.
Yes.
You're in Kentucky. The road in Ohio, where it's okay in Ohio.
I'm moments from good stuff. Anyway, that's not the important part of the show. The important part of the show is hardening adventure bikes. So we've talked about wheels, which are not cheap. So I think the average consumer, that the skid plate, I think, is a solid investment from everyone at every level. To me, wheels is toward the end of the list for the average consumer for sure. So tell me some other stuff.
It depends on how you do it. So like to relace the wheels to the stock hubs, it was like $1,100.
I paid roughly the same.
Right? If you want a full set of wheels, you're looking like $2,500 bucks, because then you also got to buy brake rotors and all this bullshit.
I want to throw out there because it was the same episode, like Mark's asking me about setting up a scrambler, like, bars are $60, and depending on what bike you have, you should buy bars. Not because your bars are bad, it's that your bars will bend.
No.
The number of WR250s, CRF 250Ls, I've watched the bars bend the first time the owners dropped them. Like, it's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, the Ténéré, the first thing I did was change the bars, and then I learned the risers were shit too. So I changed the risers with rally raids because the bars snap. And
did you break those
risers
items?
Bend if you look at them funny. No. Okay. I knew people were snapping the bars, and I knew I was going to drop the bike a lot, so I replaced those. But the bar risers, they twist really easily. So I replaced those after a couple of good drops.
I'll throw that out there that because I'm riding a non-traditional bike in a non-traditional way, I have rocks risers, which I need to get the geometry of the bike, we'll say, closer to correct. But I have the same issue that you said. They twist and get goofy, and it makes the front end.
No one can see it unless we post this on YouTube. That was me making a horrible face about about Drew having rocks risers on his bike, which I have had. If you don't familiar with rocks risers, they pinch to your stock risers like they're handlebars, and then you clamp your handlebars to those. And the problem is A, you've got more leverage, right? So you get less feel and a slower feedback, which is fine if you're just riding road, right? But B, if you drop the bike, they tend to twist really aggressively and they can actually snap or pop out.
Right.
So I had them on a bike. I quickly took them
I
off.
don't have a lot
I
of
do
options.
not recommend them.
Unfortunately, the average Bonneville person wants the bars closer to them. I need them further away because the pegs are too far forward because, well, it's a cruiser, not a race bike.
You're an engineer. Draw them in CAD and have someone make them. I don't see a problem.
I'm cheap. That's the problem. We've covered this, right? This $80 commercial solution works good enough for the talent that I have. Anyway, so yeah, bars and stuff. I think you should cover pegs because
okay. I was gonna go crash bars, but we can go pegs.
Right.
That's fine. Pegs. There's a lot of different ways you can go with pegs. I kept the stock ones for a while. The only reason I actually changed them originally was because when I made a big camel order, Corey sent me a set of pegs. He just threw them in the box, and I ran those for a while. I will say those went through a lot of drops and a lot of carnage, and finally, like, the tip of it broke off. So I had to replace those, and Corey had the same thing happen to him in Moab. So he bought some like WR pegs, and then he gave those to me when mine broke. So I was running the WR pegs. The problem was they weren't exactly right for the bike. So the springs wouldn't work. So they would like pop up and stay up sometimes, which was kind of a challenge. So I ordered some right before the race, and I just called Slavens. And really the only thing he had was the big Rally Fastaway aluminum pegs. And I was like, all right, I'll try those. And I got them, and they were huge. And I was like, oh, this makes me kind of nervous. And I was really worried that I was going to drop the bike and they were going to snap because they're so long. There's all that leverage to grab something and snap off. It was really comfortable. It was nice to have all that like foot room, but one drop and it just sheared completely off. So now on that bike, there's the pegs, and then there's a steel stamp peg bracket that's bolted to the frame. So I'm running some Fastaway steel pegs, and I was grinding them a bunch in Arizona. And I like the pegs, but where I'm nervous is I'm nervous now the peg is going to be too strong. And instead of just like the tip breaking off like they did with Corey's, which is going to happen, it's aluminum. It's no knock on Corey's stuff. Like, I beat the shit out of those pegs for 2 years. And it just, the tip broke off versus the Fastaways lasted one drop and completely exploded. If I take a hard fall on that steel peg, I'm worried I'm going to rip the peg mount and the bolts right out of the frame, and then I'm really in trouble.
Those peg mounts are aluminum, right?
No, they're steel, and they're bolted in there with some big bolts. I mean, they've got to be like 12 or 14 millimeter bolts. They're big bolts.
Might make it.
I don't know. I don't want to find out in Romania when I don't have Drew to follow me.
That's an extra 10 grand.
So there's always something, like whenever you're upgrading something, you have to think about what it's bolted to. And if you over upgrade the thing that it's bolted to, you end up failing the thing that it is bolted to. So I have to be conscious of that. We'll see how that goes.
I mean, that's the classic muscle car thing, right? Like you can bore and stroke the engine, but now you're going to buy a new transmission, right? Like that's how it works.
Oh yeah.
I want to reiterate that on there. This is not a hard and fast rule, but I typically find that there's a reverse correlation between comfort and performance. I think the adventure community really loves really wide pegs. And that's fine. Like if you want wide pegs, get wide pegs, but understand that they become a liability the deeper you go into the forest.
The other problem that I see a lot of people doing too is, everybody wants to change the geometry of the bike. So bar risers, pull them back, right? Which is fine when you're just sitting. But when you start standing and you're trying to ride hard, it completely, like, you lose all feel for the bike and control, right? But the other thing that people do is lower the foot pegs. And the really challenging, scary part about lowering foot pegs that no one remembers and thinks about is you're already on an adventure bike with low ground clearance. Your feet are already prone to getting caught between the peg and a rock or a tree or a stick, right? And breaking your foot. If you're sitting on your peg and your toes are aimed down because you're sitting on your heel and your toes are aimed down and you catch your toe and you crush it against the peg, you just broke your foot, right? Now you want to lower your pegs 3/4 of an inch or an inch or whatever, and you're sticking your feet out of the way. You're gonna catch your foot because now it's not protected anymore. So, stock height or higher on your toes in. It's super, super critical if you want to ride hard on those big bikes, especially because it's not a dirt bike. It doesn't weigh 200 pounds, right? It has twice the weight behind it, which means you're trying to stop a freight train with your foot.
Right. Well, that's a great point. To the listeners' benefit, I replaced the stock Triumph pegs with a set of aluminum. Oh man, what's the name of that company? I can't think of what it's called now. But anyway, it's more of a, like whatchamacallit, like not hipster brand, but it's a style brand, right? Like, and there's nothing wrong with them. I liked them, but they were dulling out because they were aluminum. And that's exactly what happened is I was riding right out of Lago Linda and I passed a log that I didn't see because of the grass. That log hit the peg, really hurt my foot because the bikes don't move, right? Like a 500-pound bike doesn't get out of the way. Your foot's still going to get pinched, period. So I hurt my foot a little bit. Thank God I had dirt bike boots on, but it bent the peg. Like I had to replace it. So I bought, what are those things? Pivot pegs, which I'm not a huge fan of pivot, although I'm more now than I used to be, but they're steel and they've got great serrated edges. So they've got a good bite.
So now instead of the aluminum bending, your foot just breaks more.
You're not wrong about that either. I think these pivot pegs is how they're bit.
But now you've got better boots. Now you've got some real Liat boots.
Also true.
5.5.
Yeah, those are some seriously armored boots. But I mean,
makes a difference.
No, you're dead on. I mean, but the WR, I think I have aftermarket pegs on, but they're metal. They're just better serrated than stock. But on the 250L, like I beat the shit out of that bike and still had the stock pegs. And what I liked about it was the pegs bent and didn't break. Like I hit, raced it, all that other shit and beat stuff up with it and they bent and did break. So it's just stuff that, like you said, people should think about. That there's nothing wrong with lowering your pegs. Just understand that you've given yourself a major liability in the woods. So be cognizant of that if you decide to venture deeper.
Breaking your foot in the woods is not great. You don't want to be doing that.
Yeah. So tell me about crash bars, man.
Crash bars. So originally I ran the Heeds. It was the bunkers, the bigger ones that went all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. And then I have the Heed rear bars that kind of like trim. They go from the license plate and they kind of trim forward and they bolt up to the passenger pegs. And the rear ones have actually held up awesome. Those things I think have saved the bike from a lot of crashes, and they're not heavy. They're only like 3 or 4 pounds. They're very light. They've taken a lot of abuse. The bunkers, I kept bending because they're a little lighter duty. And what I noticed was they're so tall and the Ténéré is so narrow that when you drop the Ténéré, you either hit it down low on the bars or you hit the actual handlebars. So I was finding that the Heeds were a little more coverage than they needed, and it was extra weight that wasn't really doing anything. It wasn't adding any extra protection. So when I bought the bike, they came with the SW Motex, just the lower ones, and they're way thicker, way more stout. And actually, when I bend them, I can take them out, put them in a vise, and bend them back. So those they weigh less. Yeah. And the weight is lower. I think they're still like 16 pounds.
That's
those have been pretty good, but I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about this or not, but I'm going to throw Corey a plug. Corey is working on some radiator guards that are steel, like thick plate steel. Yeah. And he built, Corey's got his side fairings now that are actual dirt bike plastic so they can take a hit without breaking. Nice. And he's got his fork guards that are actual plastic now because the Ténéré fork guards are super brittle and they snap if you look at them crooked. So he basically has been running a prototype for like a year, I think, and he's running no front crash bars and just this radiator support guard that protects the radiator. So now he's got these really flexible dirt bike style plastic panels. Yeah. And then under that is a really durable 3/16 or whatever, piece of plate steel holding the radiator. I think he's got an order of those, so I'm hoping to see that soon so I can try that out, because he said it only weighs like 4 pounds.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
So if I can drop another, 12, 13 pounds off the bike, I think I'll be under 400 pounds here soon.
No, that would be rad.
So, yeah. I mean, the new shock is like 2 pounds lighter than the other shock, the Olin shock, and lighter than the stock shock. The forks are lighter by a pound a piece, I think, than the aftermarket and the stock. And the triples are lighter because when I took the Andriani Olin's forks come with triples, because the stock forks are, I think, 42 or 43 millimeter, and the Olin's forks are 48, right? So the MX Tech forks are 49, but they still fit the same triples. But you can't buy triples for the Ténéré. No one sells them. You have to buy a fork kit.
Yeah.
So when I sold the forks and the shock, which sold in 2 days, surprisingly, I had to sell that triple. So who was it? X-Trig. X-Trig made 10 triples for a race team in Europe a while back, and they only used 6 of them. Adam from MX Tech got the last 4 in the world. And I got a set, Damon got a set, and he got a set, and I think my buddy Bjorn might be taking the last set, and he's got 10 more on order from
your buddy Bjorn.
X-Trig.
He's my buddy Bjorn.
I've ridden with him, so
that's
whatever.
A good point. Couldn't help myself.
Did you do a podcast with
him? Early on. Yeah. Listeners can go back to probably, you could arguably call it the first season, right? Like, I don't create seasons for the podcast, but it is how it's turned out, right? Like, I make podcasts in the winter, and then the summer they kind of trail off and they come back. So, but yeah, he's an early guy. So he's changed his
Bjorn might be picking up a set of those. We'll see.
No, that would be rad. So, no, I like that concept. I got mixed emotions about radiator guards for dirt bikes, but I love the concept. If that's what you said, Camel, right? Camel ADVs might be developing.
Corey, I probably shouldn't even be talking about it, but I think the R&D is over and the parts have been ordered, so I think that should be coming to market soon. And,
that would be ideal. I mean, this podcast is being recorded in January, may not see the light of day for a little while, so we'll see how it works out. But no, that excites me too, because I mean, like I said, I don't think I'm in a space yet to just be dropping money on a new bike. But Ténérés are getting cheaper, so there's a possibility that I may.
Yeah, I want to find one with a wrecked front end where I can just pull the forks and the triples off and put a new set in there, and just I don't even care if it has a clean title. It'll just be my race bike.
Yeah, I need to start poking some dealers to find that out, because I wish, obviously, all the listeners that follow me on Instagram know that I'm a shark on Marketplace, always looking at where the deals are at.
There's a couple MCC, or my local dealer, not MCC. They Moto Works. They had one for $7,500.
Ooh, yeah.
And it only had like 10,000 miles on it.
That was a good deal. I should have bought that. T7. Yeah, I think I did share one the other day.
Had a bunch of Farkles too.
8-ish or something like that. But yeah. Then there was a scrambler for sale somewhere for like $3,500 or $4,000. I'm like, oh, Jesus. I'm having a hard time not buying that, because I could use the backup at this point, because mine's seen some shit. I got to weld my exhaust again. Anyway, so after engine guards and whatnot, what is next for you?
Well, let's go back to things I did before the stuff that I did recently. So total stuff done to the bike. We went over wheels. We went over pegs. We went over skid plates, crash bars. I have a Leo Vince set of headers with a custom mid pipe by my buddy Dennis, and then a wings can. And then I have a tune from Two Wheel Dyno Works that they just updated.
Let's back up to that to some degree. In the interest of adventure riding, exhaust is very motorcycle specific, but what are the universal benefits of exhaust from your perspective?
I mean, nowadays, most of it is weight. Catalytic converters are super heavy. They also hold in a lot of heat, and they take that heat and they shove it back in the motor. So modern emissions, especially for diesels, but modern emissions in general ruin engines. They run lean, which means they run hot. They throw heat back into the engine from the catalytic converter. They run lean from the tunes because they're expecting some exhaust gases back from EGRs that they're not actually getting. So bikes just run crappy stock. They burn valves. They won't last. So you end up increasing the longevity of the engine. You end up getting more power. You end up getting smoother power. And you end up cutting a lot of weight just by doing an exhaust and a tune.
Yeah, that's the thing. Is again, like you said, in this case, wheels for $1,100 would be cheaper because you're looking at spending $1,000 on an exhaust plus an extra 500-ish on a tune, probably.
Yeah, it was like $350 for the headers, and it was another like $400 for the can, and another $300 for the mid pipe. You can get that stuff from Corey. Corey didn't offer that when I was building my bike, and then the tune was like $300.
Right.
It wasn't that
bad. As I said, you're $1,500 in, maybe $1,250, but
$1,000. Yeah. So I mean, that's more of a performance thing. It doesn't have to do it, but it makes the bike run better and smoother. And when you're trying to go slow, that low end is really important. The other thing that helps in the low end, and you talked about in your podcast yesterday, was I always go 1-2 smaller on the front sprocket on like every adventure bike I own. It's not so much for power, and it's not so much for torque. It helps me with clutching up with wheelies for sure, but more than anything, it's to go slower, easier. So the average adventure bike does about 10 miles an hour clutch out with the stock gearing, which is a little fast. If you're trying to go slow and do really technical stuff, you end up having to use the clutch a lot, and then you just don't have enough oomph, you know? So you go one tooth down and you get to about 6 to 7 mile an hour range, and you get a little bit snappier of a response, right? The bike wakes up a little bit more. You can kind of, from a dig, you know, barely moving at 2 miles an hour, pull in the clutch, give it a bounce, pop the bike up, which is one of the things that I love about the Ténéré. With the tune and with the gearing that I have, a lot of people want more power. I want an 890. I want 100 horsepower. I want a 1290. I want 160 horsepower. The problem is, if you can't get that power to the ground, you can't do anything, right? So trying to hop a log, like on my multi-enduro, I couldn't preload and bounce that suspension and get enough traction because the bike had so much torque, even in enduro mode, that I just spun the tire up. I couldn't, with that wheel selection and that tire size and that bike's weight and the torque, it was really challenging to find traction. And that is one of the things that I love so much about the Ténéré is it's got just enough power to be fast, but it's not too much power where you're just always wheel spinning. That bike always finds traction on hill climbs, clutching up a wheelie, crossing a log, when it's wet in the sand. Like, too much power is more times a detriment than it is a good thing.
I tell everybody.
Less power, gear it down.
Yeah, it's more power just gets you off the cliff sooner, in my opinion. But everybody, what an adventure ride is whatever it is to everyone, right? That's fine. And I agree with you. And I wanted to throw out the caveat. Front sprockets are cheap. Front sprockets mean you can typically keep the stock chain. You just have to adjust that rear wheel out a little bit. It's not that big a deal. I don't know if I've talked about on the podcast before. When I had the 250L, I went up 2 teeth in the back, and then I would carry a 1 down sprocket front in my toolkit and change it in the parking lot because it was so easy because it had 2 like M10. Well, they were probably like M4, M5 bolts, but they were 10 millimeter bolts. So I would change it in the parking lot, 10 minutes, and I could switch. So I could ride all the way to there with, not even a 5% difference in speedometer because I had 2 teeth on the back, and then swap the front and still had enough adjustment in the chain on that 250L. And it was heaven. It's a little tougher on my scrambler. It's a 36 millimeter bolt. Like, it's a giant thing on the front, so I can't do that. But I wanted to offer that to the listeners. Like, if you have a major, like you have to ride every day on the freeway, but you do want a little extra torque and this, that, and the other, there's something to be said for adding 2 teeth on the back and not changing the front. But changing the front is cheap, and it's the least amount of fussing if you can deal with the loss in top end.
The only thing that you will sacrifice is the smaller you go with that front sprocket, the tighter the chain has to kink. So
Good
the
point.
faster it wears out, and also the faster that sprocket wears out because it's a smaller diameter. So it hits the teeth more frequently. So you are going to go through sprockets and chains a little bit faster.
Watch your swing arm.
And on the, well, and on the highway too, yeah, you do have to watch your swing arm and your geometry a little bit. But on the highway, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I'm going to lose all my top end." I'm like, you're talking about dropping like 500 RPM max. Like usually it's 200-300 RPMs. Like if your bike can't handle an extra 200 or 300 RPMs on the highway, I don't know what to tell you. Like you need a new bike.
It's different strokes, different folks. The Scrambler is not the classical bike for a lot of people. I have no 6 gear, right? I'm a 5-speed. When I switched to losing one tooth on the front, I do not enjoy riding that bike on the highway for, let's call it, more than an hour, because it really is screaming at 80 miles an hour. Because we have 70 zones here, so if I need to pass somebody,
we're also talking about a WR250.
Well, no, I'm talking about my Scrambler, but yes, like same story, right? But
your Scrambler too?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it is really running at a higher RPM that's creating a vibration that is annoying. Is it capable? 100%. It's revving at 5,500 RPMs versus 4,500 RPMs.
So from 5,000 to 5,500, you're feeling that big of a vibration change.
Yeah, and this is completely exclusive to this bike. Any Bonneville owner that's listening to this podcast knows exactly what I'm talking about. Once it gets above 4,000 RPMs, right around 5,000 RPMs, you can notice the character changes. It's so docile and so wonderful below that, but it gets very peaky. And so when I start to get up to 5,000, 6,000 RPM, you can notice that. And it just kind of drones on the highway. Like I rode to March Moto Madness in Tennessee. So I was on the highway for like 6 hours, and I had done that. And I realized, one, how far the speedometer is like off from stock, like what it's supposed to be, combined with it was just annoying. But it's a taste thing, right? Like I put up with stuff on my bike that no one would put up with, right? Like how do you ride without a windshield or whatever else it is? So it's a taste thing. Some people, like you said, they're not going to notice and it doesn't matter. Other people are, guys that buy knobby tires for their adventure bikes and then complain that it's loud. Like, duh.
Yeah. Everybody has a preference, and you do what my bike is set up to ride super hard off road, and it probably would, like most of the time I've ridden on the road, I'm like, this sucks. Like when I had the Olens on there and one of the mooses was going bad, like the front moose was going bad, the front end was just going down the road at 50 miles an hour like a jackrabbit, just bouncing. I was like, this is miserable. This bike sucks.
I mentioned that in my podcast, the same thing. I've got those race wheels 2118, and if you pick the wrong tires or you didn't balance them, like I put wheel weights on them finally because I'm like, holy shit.
You have to.
Horrible.
If you got a wheel lock on there, you at least have to put a bunch of weights away from the wheel lock, or you're doing yourself a disservice.
I've never done that. Like my WR, I don't balance the tires or anything on my WR. I just put them on there and ride. I'll ride 70 miles an hour on my WR, but something about those rims on the Scrambler, that thing was awful. It's terrifying.
Well, the other thing you have to think about too is if the tire's out of balance, your suspension is trying to absorb that going down the road, right? So that tire is moving up and down, and that is weight that is affecting the suspension that's fighting it.
Yeah, and wearing out the oil and so on. No, all right. Anyway, as we've got into the Durandi debate, after gearing, what do you think?
Let's see. What else have I done to that bike? Obviously, I deleted all the emission stuff. Right? Let's be super illegal.
You still got O2 sensors?
I put in. Originally. That's a recent development. The first two-wheel Dyno Works tune, you needed it. I just sent it in and I got it back like right before the last race. It deletes it now. So they were able to unlock something in the computer and get some more tuning done, and they were able to tune out the O2. So I don't have an O2 in there anymore. But foam air filters, get rid of the paper filters. Get a foam filter that's washable and get a pre-filter. That's like super, super number one. Pre-filter, foam air filter. The other thing I will say on big adventure bikes, and it's not a problem on the Ténéré, but it is, what's up?
Foam air filters is a big deal to me, only with respect to, I have no doubt that KTM has an option. I'm not surprised that Ténéré has an option since you have one, obviously. But it makes me wonder, can Tiger and BMW owners find regular foam air filters for those bikes? Do you know?
I believe there is one, but the Tiger has a pretty good intake. where I was going was some of these manufacturers have really shit intakes
Yeah.
and some of them decent intakes. The Tiger intake is actually pretty good. If you put a pre-filter in it, it catches
Okay.
everything. The Tiger intake, it has to go down and then come up and then go over and then back down into the intake through the filter. So you put a pre-filter before, it catches it,
Yeah.
and all of the heavy particles can't really get up easily to get up above and then go back down, dropping through the filter. So it's not that bad on there. The problem with paper filters is if you go through water and they
Right.
get wet, obviously that creates a problem. Like my multi-enduro had a ram air. The front tire was here, right? The front of the engine was here. The front tire literally funneled water into the airbox at the filter,
Wow.
into a paper
It's so
filter. And they were
Italian.
wondering why they were blowing up engines. And so I actually made a pre-filter, right?
Yeah.
To prevent, like, the suck because I still had to take the tank off all the time to get to it because
Yeah.
there's no way to get to it, right? The other problem that happens is most of these airboxes are made, they're multiple pieces bolted
Yeah.
together. And especially these higher horsepower bikes like the Pan America and the 1290 and the Ducati and the big Triumph 1200s, they make so much torque, right? What happens is you've got like a lower airbox, a filter, a seam line, an upper airbox. Sometimes the filter's
Yeah.
here, sometimes it's here, and then like another cover usually, right? So there's usually like multiple seam areas that are bolted together with just a gasket. And what happens is they tell people, oh, you only have to change the filter every like 10,000 miles or whatever, right? And then people do a BDR, and in 6 hours of following 8 of their friends in the dust, the filter's completely
Yeah.
plugged, right? And on my multi and in the Pan America, they're ram air filters. They're literally aimed at the tire. It's like, here's the tire, here's the dust, here's the filter. The Pan America is a K&N style filter, right? My Ducati was a paper filter. So what happens is these filters get plugged and then the vacuum spikes. The engine still wants air.
Right.
The vacuum
You
spikes.
get more pressure.
The engine gets hot.
Yeah.
The box warps, right?
Hmm.
And then in between the screws, you suck in
Which
dirt.
even worse. Yeah.
Or you blow holes through the pleats of the filter, or it sucks it around the filter because they don't grease the rims from the factory, right? The Pan America has that, at least when I checked, when I rode one, had the ram air with a K&N filter, and those are the worst because when those things start getting plugged, it literally just blows holes right through the cotton,
Wow.
like a little rocket.
That'd be interesting to check
So
out.
those are the worst.
Let me tie in here because you obviously know the backstory of this. The last time I pulled the air filter out of the scrambler after racing a couple rounds last year, it was not nice. So I made a pre-filter and I oiled it. And all of a sudden,
Didn't it not want to
it
run?
was crazy. It would run fine. And I went to work and I was getting on the highway and I got way up in the rev range and it started cutting out. And I was like, oh shit, why is this thing cutting out? Do I have a miss? Like, what's going on? And I was freaking out and I didn't think about it. And I changed the spark plugs in a rush and all kinds of other stuff. I'm like praying I didn't dump a bunch of dirt in there when I did the spark plugs because I did them all like haphazardly without taking the tank off. Anyway, and I realized, no, I oiled the pre-filter that it's not designed for. And as soon as I pulled that thing off, it ran great. So I was like, okay, apparently I have to just run a dry pre-filter.
How long did you wait until you oiled the pre-filter, and then how long did you wait till you rode it?
It'd been on there a while, right? Like, okay. And you could talk about the side panel was over it and covered it. And so maybe it didn't dry, but it had been on there a bit. So, and it sat for several days and kept doing the same thing, right? It wasn't like I just oiled it.
It should have been fine.
It just, that for whatever reason, the ECU expected a lot more air than it was getting at high RPM. So it just cut out for whatever reason. It just cut out. And I was like, holy shit. But it needed it. So yeah, for Bonneville owners that are listening, we've got that snorkel that's like pointed at the damn ground on the side of that thing, and it's at least covered. But yeah, it snorts in quite a bit of dirt if you're out on gravel roads, and I spent no shortage of it between the summer races of KXCR and 2022 and whatnot. So I bought an ATV pre-filter or air filter cover or whatever it was. And just put a zip tie on it. I just cut it down the length, threw it on, put a zip tie on it. There's a top hole on it. I glued a plug of foam on it. And
anything helps. Like KTM on the 1290s, and I think the old 1190s, they had like the front scoops are like by the headlight, and they have these filters that you can put. Those are great, but like you can run the paper filters if you have a pre-filter, right? If you don't, you want to run a foam filter. But like a pre-filter is convenient on certain bikes because like on the bigger bikes, like the 1190s and the 1290s, like you have to take the tank off to get to the stupid filter, right? So if you have a pre-filter that's external, you never even have to actually change the main filter because it never gets dirty. The pre-filter catches all the crap and you can clean it like on the trail. So that was another selling point for me for the Ténéré was the air filter is right under the seat. So I can get to it easily.
Yeah.
You know, there were some other manufacturers like Susan's Desert X. It's still under the tank, you know, and I dealt with that on my other Ducati. The crash bars bend so bad. So I have to take the crash bars off, pull the giant 8-gallon fuel tank, try and get to the filter, even the pre-filter, put the tank back on. And then I'm using like my crash bars get so deformed on that bike. I'm using ratchet straps to like try and line up the bolts and bend things and get it back together. It's like a 6-hour process just to take the tank off, just to check an air filter. And I was like, never, ever, ever again am I going through that, because all I do is ride off road. So the filter is always dirty. Right now, I just pop the seat off on the Ténéré, pull the pre-filter, put a pre-filter on there. I carry a pre-filter with me, like crunched up in a ball under the seat.
That's a great point. I mean, if listeners haven't caught that already, I was going to buy a Tiger 800 XCX. That's what I wanted. I was afraid that I was going to get screwed on the trade. And I knew I wanted to ride the next bike I bought every single day, nonstop. And I was afraid of how much maintenance it was going to take to maintain the Tiger, that I couldn't ride it every single day because of what you said, because of changing the air filter and all other stuff. So it's something for people to think about. If they want to get really nuts in the adventure space, like pay attention to where these air filter changes are. And if you're a good wrench, who cares? But if you don't like to work on your own stuff, it's a serious pain in the ass.
Whenever a new bike comes out, that's the first thing I look for. Where's the air filter? I swear to God, every time when the Desert X came out, I was like, oh, cool, Desert X. And then I'm like, where's the air filter? Under the tank? No, I don't want one ever. Give it back. Like, and then the new Cove, under the seat.
Yeah.
The 790s, 890s, under the seat. You know, as long as it's under the seat or easy to access, super cool. But the only thing I know on the Desert X, I forget who it is, but there's a company who's making like a whole fairing kit for it, and they're making a special tank, and there's a cutout right on top, and they've got an air filter that you can literally just yank out and pop back in. It's pretty cool.
No, that's good to know. Okay, so we've covered oil air filter, if you can get it. What else?
Handguards. Handguards are an interesting subject, right? And I've tried a lot of them. I've been on the Cycra train for a long time. I really like the Cycras. They were really good on my Ducati because I made some custom brackets. So the Cycra was only like that long. So I went like all 4 years with the same set of Cycras and I never bent them. On the Ténéré, things were a little bit different and I had to run the full length Cycra. So they were getting pretty beat up. Highway dirt bike bars gave me a set of theirs. And those were really, really nice, super beefy, hard to bend. You know, the only trouble I was running into was the main bolt is huge. Like you tap the bar and it's most of them are like an insert and then you thread into that insert in the bar. This was the entire bolt was like an inch. It was huge. I
like those, by the way.
Right? That was cool. But I couldn't, I took some hits and it twisted and it tighten the bolt so much.
You said you sheared the bolt in a crash or what?
No, what it twisted, right? So I hit a tree and they twisted up and it tightened that bolt so much I could never loosen it. And it was so tight that I actually had to like take the bars and cut it. I had to cut the bar like completely off. And then the side bolts where it goes in, because they have that really nice plate. Like it's nice kit. It's really beefy. And they have that nice plate where you put the screws through the side to hold the brackets. It's like the bolt goes here and a little bracket goes here, and then you mount your handguard to the front of it with a screw. That screw would come loose.
Okay. Listeners love it when you are drawing on the screen with your hands that they can't see.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's why we're recording this one. So they were. I liked the mirrors. I liked that they were beefy. I liked them overall, but I started turning a corner where I wanted to cut more weight. And I realized I was looking at my bars and I was looking at the front of the bike and I started realizing how much weight I had really high on the bike. So I started
Yeah.
one day, I started just pulling stuff off, right? So I pulled the headlight out. I weighed it. It was 5 pounds. I pulled all the switches off. That was 1.5 pounds. I pulled the highway dirt bike bars off. They were like 3 pounds or something crazy, right?
Yeah.
I pulled 10 pounds worth of shit off the front of the bike, right? So then I started going, okay, what can I do to cut weight? All right, well, I can get rid of a bunch of these switches. I only use the horn and the start button. So I put a start button on there and I went on Rocky Mountain and I found this really nice like billet 2-button thing.
Yeah.
And I also was having an issue with the clutch. I put like a stunt clutch on there, and that bike, I'm sidetracking a little bit, but that
Sure.
bike doesn't, when you pull in the clutch switch doesn't just let you start the bike in or out of neutral or first, right? It actually changes the map. So
Yeah.
when you put that bike in first, pulling the clutch, or you're pulling the clutch in neutral, it puts it in like a funny idle map, which makes it run different. And then when you let the clutch out, it puts it in a running map. Now, what happens is if you change that clutch perch to try and get a different throw or a different style clutch, and you jumper that clutch switch, it stays in the shitty idle run mode.
Yeah.
So the bike will run crappy, it'll lose power, it'll stall. It just feels like it has nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I had to have a clutch switch. I tried to not jumper it and run the hard enduro. And I was like, screw it. I'll just always put the bike in neutral when I have to start it. Oh, fuck that. On a hill, trying
Yeah,
to
that
push the
sucked.
bike uphill in gear to get it in neutral to start the bike, that sucked. So what I
Yes, it
did
sucked.
was the 2-button switch. I turned one of the switches into a clutch switch
Oh,
instead
that's
of,
cool.
so now I just push a button and it's overriding the clutch switch
Yeah.
and I can start the bike and it's in the neutral map or the chill map or whatever. And then I let it go and I'm in my normal map again and it's like my clutch is let out. So I simulated a manual mechanical clutch switch with just a clutch button.
Nice.
So I was able to run a 2-finger super easy pull stunt clutch, which is lighter than stock and has an insanely easy pull and it's
Yeah.
longer so I can really like feed the power in and out. So I did that. I had just a little switch that Adam actually showed me the company to find all the factory Yamaha connectors. So I bought factory connectors and wired into the factory connector.
Nice.
And then I wired in the start switch that I stole off one of the dirt bikes. So I just have a dirt bike start switch, 2 little easy switches. That drops 1 pound probably. Those things weigh
Yeah.
nothing. And then I went for the handguards, I went to these new, is it
Molecule.
Molecule? Yeah. I
Yeah,
went to
because I
these
spotted
new,
him. I was like, I want those. Yeah. I had a
I went to the
Molecule skid
Molecule
plate, so I'm a big
handguards.
fan. Yeah.
And everybody's been doing, instead of the wraparounds, everybody's going to flag handguards, which I think are great on the dirt bikes, but I really need the wraparounds to protect the
Yeah.
levers and for just fall protection. And traditionally, like the skid plate, what I'm learning is the aluminum handguards just bend and they stay bent and they flip up and they get all mangled, right? Well, these are like 8 millimeter thick plastic. You still thread and tap the bar end, right? You put in these inserts and you thread a bolt in, and then you've got these 8 millimeter thick plastic wraparounds that mount to a nice beefy aluminum bracket.
Yeah.
And man, they took some gnarly hits, and
Oh, yeah.
they weigh like less than 1 pound. They're
Yeah.
super light. So I dropped 2 pounds there, and they're really durable. And the nice thing is when I drop the bike, they flex and they spring back.
Yeah. I want to make some comments about handguards. I had Zeta on the 250L. The Zeta 250L handguards are probably my favorite. And then I had Circra on the WR 250R. And I don't want to say anything bad about Circular because I think they make good product. I was surprised though. I had an easy off on, like I forgot to put the kickstand down all the way on my WR and it fell over in the driveway and it bent the Circular handguards. And then when I went to bend them back, they snapped. That kind of surprised me. Now, in post 2020 world, who knows where those were actually made? But I want to mention that I'm a big fan of Tusk handguards. We can, again, debate Chinesium. That's fine. But I've had Tusk handguards. I got them on the WR now. I've had them on the Scrambler. I raced the Scrambler for 2 years. And the Tusk handguards were shockingly impressive.
I'm
That's
just going to
probably
start
not
calling
a
you
good...
Mr. Tusk.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, right? Like,
It's all you talk about in all your podcasts is fucking Tusk this, good Tusk that.
I'm cheap, right? Like, I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, I'm not saying they're the best. I'm just saying that they're the most you can get per dollar, right? Like, there's other stuff. If you can afford it, buy it. But there's some perks.
I will say one thing.
Go
I
ahead.
like Tusk, and I think they do a good job, and I think Rocky Mountain has done a good job making affordable products. The problem that I have with it is a lot of it is like cheap rip-off versions of the same
Sure.
product. Like,
Well, and
they're
like
using
I said,
the Chinese model in the US,
sure.
and that's a little annoying.
No, it's I said, like, if you want to have a debate about Chinesium, I'm open to it. That's fine. I have no problem with that. My beef with the Tusk handguards are specifically, well, it's both ends, right? I literally, to get them to fit my bike was a serious pain in the ass. I literally bent them. I literally had them on the ground, hitting them with a torch, beating them with a hammer. I think I had to take them to work and bend them in a vise and all kinds of other stuff. So that's both ends. Like, fitment was a pain in the ass on the Scrambler, and it was ATV bars. You think it would have been easy. But at the same time, they're so damn strong that I had to take them to work and bend them with a vise and shit like that at the office. We make, it's factory equipment at the time. So, like, they're hardy. But again, I'm not debating about weight. For me, it was about an affordable handguard, and I knew I needed something to handle a 500-pound bike. So it's 6 and 1.5 dozen the other.
I mean, no, hands down, the strongest handguards you can get are the highway dirt bike guards, and I still bent them. So, like, at the end of the day, I don't think it matters. The lessons that I've learned is I don't think it matters what you're running, whether it's a skid plate or whether it's like a handguard. Like, if you're running something that's aluminum, it's going to bend and it's going to stay bent and it's going to stay that way. And then you're going to end up replacing them in this constant cycle. So obviously, I've only run a couple of times, and I haven't really had a lot of heavy drops yet, but I have landed on some rocks, and I am more than impressed with these full wraparound molecule handguards based on the weight and the quality of the components. And the durability of the components. The one thing is because they don't mount, like most of them mount like farther out down by where the clamps are. These mount like really close to the grips. So I'm not sure, like I've got different bars on there and they're a little bit narrower than the Ténéré bars. Dirt bike bars are a little bit narrower because you don't have all this crap on there. Adventure bikes have, this switch housing and that switch housing and
switch cubes, big ones.
We're adding fucking Game Boys on the handlebars nowadays. So like you look at like a Pan America and it's got like the most confusing switch housing that's huge ever, right? So, I'm not sure that those would fit on a lot of adventure bikes without having wide bars and without having to really jury rig a lot of your stuff around. For me,
that's my concern.
It's perfect.
Yeah, I would like a set, and I want to throw that out there. Like, I'm a big fan of AXP and Molecule for skid plates. So I'm excited that Molecule's done that, and I'd like a set. I've looked at those, and between price and fitment, I've been a little gun shy initially, so we'll see if that turns out. Anyway, we got about, 10-ish minutes or so, maybe a little more. What else you got?
My headlight kit. That's pretty cool.
Sure. You think that applies to all adventure riders?
No, but it's cool. The suspension, the MX Tech suspension bomb, but I mean, again, that doesn't apply to all adventure riders. Most people are going to look at that and say that costs nearly as much as the bike does. Like, I think I was talking pricing with Adam yesterday, and to kind of go over suspension for the average person, right? Like, you can take the stock Ténéré stuff and have it revalved and resprung, and it's pretty darn good, right? For like $1,000-1,200, right? You can have a
Yeah.
good shop, revalve it, respring it. It's going to be really capable. The issues that you're going to run into is they're really thin wall, really weak aluminum, uncoated internally. If you ride hard, they're going to wear out fast. They're going to wear out the internals. You're going to have to service them a lot. You're going to have to replace actual tubes like a lot, and they're going to bend super easily. I had bent mine pretty quickly, right? So the next step up from there is, cartridges and a rear shock, and that's still $3,000, right? And you're still putting plus 20 mil cartridges to get more height out of the bike, but it's still stock fork tubes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to your point, I mean, I'm now officially $3,000 deep in a brand new set of suspension for my scrambler, which probably puts me almost $4,000 deep lifetime for that bike on suspension. Mind you, it's got 80,000 miles on it. That hurts less, but yeah, it's still not cheap. Yeah. I paid $6,000 for it with that. Yeah. So do the math.
But the next step there is, for a while, the only places that made forks, because you could buy like an Olin shock or a Tractive shock or a Rally Raid shock. There was a bunch of different shocks that were around like $1,200 to like $2,600, right? Like there wasn't a ton of options, but there were shocks, right? The problem with the forks is you need the triples. So there was only like Bono was a company that was making them. And then the company who makes Poles forks, they're all pretty much KYB Triple S forks converted with custom lug lowers with triples, right? And they're about €5,000 shipped, which is about 6,000 US for a set of forks.
Yeah, I mean that's literally KLR money, right? Like you really could own a second bike for that price.
But you can get them stock Ténéré's 200 mil travel. You can get them 270 mil travel, which is absolutely bonkers. They're basically rally forks, right? Yeah. So talking to Adam, and these are just kind of prelim numbers because mine's still the prototype
R&D,
that we've
right.
Well, I think we've refined it and we've picked the numbers that we like, and I think it's working good. So I think we're good with that. He's still trying to get all the stuff in the computer. He's thinking roughly the forks with triples will be about $5,000.
Right.
And the shock is going to be about 2,600, but the shock is going to come with a hydraulic preload adjuster. Most of the other ones don't.
Right.
I think mine on my Olin's one did, but it was like you needed like an extension that was 6 feet long and an 8 millimeter. Theirs is a hand crank.
Well, walk me backwards in this. What's this travel on your new forks then?
So stock 200. He can build the forks anywhere from 200 to I think almost 260. I think I'm at 250. And the rear shock, you can only go 225 because you're just physically limited by the way things are in there. Now, Corey cut his shock mount and moved it and has a longer shock. So I think he's got like 240 mil travel on his shock, but he's actually physically moved the shock mount up. And when we pulled my shock bolt was actually bent.
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I mean, so we're talking roughly 10 inches of suspension travel, and I forget what the KTM 890 Rally has, but I assume it's not more than 11.
260 or 270, I think, because I think the standard is either 240 or 250.
Well, and that was my point. Is I was like, okay, so you can go out and buy a KTM 890 Adventure R, and you can spend $14,500, and you can have that bike. And you have good suspension, or you could have premium suspension for $15,000 on a Ténéré 700. So it really just depends on what your flavor is.
Well, and you can buy the Rally KTM with cone valves and track shock for $22,000, which is actually when you actually boil it down, that bike is a value buy, right? You want to talk about premium bikes? Hold on.
Yeah, in a world where $20,000 is typically a 1,200cc bike with electronically adjustable suspension for the street, you're having basically a African Echo race rally bike built for you from KTM from the factory for $22,000.
Well, you can't even buy an 890 and build a rally for the price that they're selling the rally for. It's not even. It's another $5,000 more because the parts are so expensive, right?
Yeah.
So like my Ténéré I mean, my Ténéré is a $20,000 bike right now, $1,100 in wheels, $1,200 in
Right.
tune and exhaust. Basically $7,600 theoretically, because the shock's
Sure.
2,600-ish, right? Theoretically in suspension once we get that figured out, right?
Sure.
Though it's a lot. It's a lot, but like, what other bikes can you buy that are that capable in that price range,
Right.
that have that kind of suspension? Like that, this suspension was also built for me, to my specs, for how I ride,
Right.
by someone who I can walk up to and just talk to, and he can give me feedback.
Yeah.
And I think suspension tuners get very undervalued in
Mm-hmm.
motorcycling, especially adventure riding. People don't give them enough credit. I see how much work Adam puts in, and
Yeah.
he works like 80-hour weeks. It's insane.
Hopefully we get him on the show at some point. And I want to piggyback and then pivot. I agree with what you're saying. I actually think that for the average consumer, they would probably benefit from some suspension tuning, while
Yeah.
at the same time, the average consumer, even in the adventure space, frankly, doesn't ride enough to really know the difference. And I'm a spitting example of that. Is that the right word? Anyway, I'm a great example of that. You're doing that tapping thing that you love to do. The listeners love it. The thing I want to pivot to in the last few minutes that we have left, the Hard Enduro to me stood out the most because we really got a chance to see the Ténéré versus the KTM 890 in the woods in the most difficult environment you could see them in here on the East Coast. What was your takeaway from that? Very different riders, by the way. I get that.
Well, and I say this a lot. There is no bad bike. There is a bad application of a bike, right? But when you're comparing a Ténéré to an 890, the 890 out of the box, and even compared to my Öhlins, the way, I'm not saying that my Öhlins wasn't good. I'm saying the way that my Öhlins was sprung in valve, because I never had a chance to make it better, that I rode his 890, and it was a superior bike. The Ténéré, and Corey said this best once, the Ténéré is an enduro bike. It likes to go slow. It loves technical. It's smooth, right? It's nimble. It's narrower at the bottom, right?
Yes.
Versus the 790, 890 is more of a dirt bike. It likes to go fast. The engine wants to be wound out. The suspension likes moving quickly. It's wider at the bottom, right? So it's not going to make it through stuff. Seth has always been, at least until I got my new suspension, Seth has always been a faster rider than me in the fast flowy stuff. He's a good rider, but when it came to the tighter technical stuff, he was struggling getting traction. Part of that was stock wheels with 20 PSI of air in the tire versus I'm running Mooses with rim locks, right? Super hard to compare those because I basically built my bike to find traction, right? He was slipping a lot. Not really his fault. That's just that setup. But
he's just not ready to make that investment yet. Yeah.
He was shoehorning that bike in places where I was just gliding through. I was just slipping right through. I was able to just pivot, turn the bike, crawl right up stuff, right? And he wasn't able to. And it's not even him. It's just that bike isn't great for hard enduro. If you want to do fast, flowy, desert, hair scrambles, like quicker stuff, that's a great bike for it. But the minute that it gets chassis and V'd out and you start losing traction, again, that bike makes, back to what we were saying earlier, it makes 100 horsepower. It makes a lot more torque, right? It's going to spin up a lot easier and a lot harder. And you can play with the traction controls and the this and the that, right? It's still going to struggle finding traction. I mean, we had the same exact tire, but he's on a 4.5-inch rim, right? With no wheel lock and 20 PSI. And I'm on a 2.5-inch rim with a Moose.
That was the observation that I wanted to point out to a lot of people. I'm a massive fan of the KTM 890 because of the low center of gravity. I've spent a lot of time. I've played around with your T7 quite a bit, and obviously I'm in the tank for the T7. But obviously you've also been on my Scrambler, and I'm so accustomed to that low weight, so I like it. But that wide tank at the bottom is a massive liability and really tight East Coast, rocky shit. I'm sure there's West Coast rocky shit too, but I'm just saying, like, when you need narrow passes to get through things and get around stuff, he was literally getting hung up by the tank in lots of places. And that's amazing.
Well, I mean, we'll put it this way. He got hung up so bad and so frustrated. He was like, I'm going home and ordering the Rage Garage tank kit, which is narrower and shifts the weight, right? He was that serious about it. Like, he was so frustrated that he wasn't making through it. And again, I'm not ripping on Seth. I love Seth. Seth's a great rider.
Seth's great.
But you're dealing with the limitations of the mechanics of the machine, right? And that bike was not prepared for what we were putting it through. And again, like, I love the Ténéré because it's a great platform, right? Yeah, you could go buy a Triumph Tiger Rally Pro for 17 grand or a Ducati Desert X for 17 grand, and you can get cruise control and Farkles, and you can pay a subscription fee and get heated seats and blah blah blah. It's almost it's like 14.5 or 15 for an 890. I would say the 890 is a more comparable bike, but most of these big adventure bikes are 17 or 18 grand. I would rather buy a Ténéré for 10 grand and put 8 grand in suspension in it and bomb the shit out of everybody than I would buy. I'll say it out loud. I hate the Tiger, but it's because I like slow, challenging technical.
Right. And
the Tiger is a street chassis. Everybody wants to argue it, and everybody wants to say that the Tiger is this great bike. It's a bike built around how most adventure riders ride, which is mostly road with some off-road. Every time I see a guy in a Tiger get into sand and mud, jackknife fall, unpredictable. They're dead every time. And I've been on this preach choir before, but I would rather buy my bike and put money into it and build it the way I want than buy a bike built by a manufacturer the way they want with cheap parts. Because, like, at the end of the day, that Ducati suspension is very similar to the Ténéré suspension. It's based off the same platform. And I will say off the bat, riding both, the Ducati does feel really good, and it is pretty darn good stock.
You mean the Desert X?
Yeah, the Desert X.
They're right. You were talking about the Multi so much. I want to make sure you.
No, the Desert X.
You're
the
talking
Desert
about
X
the
is a
Desert X.
very similar suspension platform,
right?
As the Ténéré, but it does feel really good. It was a great bike, but for me, air filter under the tank, like exposed, no frame,
Right.
I'm going to put the money in the suspension in the Desert X anyways. I'm going to build it. I'm going to put the money into a Tiger anyways. I'm still going to build an 890 suspension, even if I got an 890.
Sure.
I can go with something for 10 grand and put the best suspension I can find and still be in the door cheaper.
Yeah, it's hilarious to me to think that you and I are such different consumers, but this is a space that you and I agree on wholeheartedly. I do love the Tiger. I would love to have one. But when you tell me that a Tiger Rally Pro, which is now the only option for the off-road version of the Tiger 900, is 17 grand, or I could have a Ténéré or T7 for 11 grand. You're going to tell me that Tiger is 60+% better than the T7? I don't believe you. It just doesn't make sense. But in the end, it's what makes people happy, and I get that.
Yeah, buy what you want and buy what works for you.
Right. But you and I agree. I want to start, and I don't think this is what you're saying, but for me, I want to start at the ground up. I want the base model. I want the bare minimum, and I will build from there. While I think other people say, well, I want all this stuff, and I'm prepared to pay price X, and I get all this other stuff for free. That's fine. Because I think that is what you said. That's what the Tiger 900 Rally Pro is to most people, among other bikes, right? They have the bike they dream to have, and they also got all these extra Farkles with it, and they think it's great, and that's fine. But yeah, we do agree in that space. I'm just usually I make a lot of sacrifices, and I deal with a lot of subpar shit because I'm cheap or whatever else it is.
Well, I think we're also dealing with something in the market of everyone thinks they want more power. Everyone thinks they want a bigger bike. And I was guilty of it too. I bought a Multistrada Enduro. Like, everybody thinks they need electronic suspension. Everybody thinks they need traction control and all these different power modes and all these different Farkles. And the reality is, like, you wouldn't need traction control if you didn't have too much power, right? You wouldn't.
Yes, I do agree with that.
You wouldn't need all of these aids, right? I saw somebody PJ7 was like, look at all these cool new bikes. We're building all these PJ7s. There's hundreds of them lined up. And somebody goes, it doesn't even have ABS. What a crappy bike. And people were like, it's an off-road bike.
About?
Like, you don't want ABS off-road. Like, you don't even know what you're talking about. And a lot of these new bikes, like the new BMWs, you can't even turn off the front ABS. Right. And if you don't, I had a guy in class, if you don't buy the Pro model, you can't even turn off the ABS at all.
Right.
You can't turn off anything. I had to go in and pull a panel and crank a fuse out just to shut it off, and or either pull the fuse or I disconnected the rear sensor. Like, they're putting all these nannies on things that are costing all of this money, right? And putting these bikes in these insanely expensive areas where people can't even afford them anywhere, to the point where they're like, I'm going to go buy this Chinese bike, even though I talk shit about China all the time, when they could have just bought a cheaper bike with no fart. Like, my ABS is gone on my bike. It's deleted.
Right. I will probably, you're doing the tapping thing. I will probably post a blog about this because I want to bring back the base model, right? I think that we're in a space now. I mean, BMW in America is a clear example, right? They advertise the base model on their website. They do not import it to the United States. You have to order it if you want it, right? So if you want to save money, you have to order a bike and wait, because that they've realized they can make money off of that. If the economy takes a dump the way I personally believe that it'll be interesting to see how that shapes the market, but we're not going to know for 5-6 years down the road. So we'll see how that goes. But that's exactly it. It will be interesting in a different space, because it's been, if you can afford the payment, you can have whatever bike you want. And I think that we have all bought more bike than quote we need. And again, I'm not judging, I mean, whatever, but I think that's shaped the adventure space far more than people who are, we'll call it, aggressive off-road.
Well, and people bitch about it, and KTM, I think, kind of found a happy middle ground, right?
I agree.
Give me an 890, and it's way more capable than the other two we were just talking about.
Right.
It's an awesome bike, but you know what? You want the quick shifter, $1,500. You want the heated grips, $500. You want, like, they are making it so you can kind of like add these things on. You want the cruise control, add on. Like, you want these things, it's an add-on. You want the pro mode, right? It's an add-on, which I agree with, that a bike that's on a like 14.5 is not bad. But when you start talking about the Ducatis, where they're adding on way more, I'm not down with that, especially when I've got an Ibex sitting in my garage, 800, that literally has all of that stuff on its stock for what, 10 grand? That's the same price as the Ténéré.
I mean, as we're recording this, we're in the midst of Dakar. So between Mason Klein and everything else, we should probably come back and do, true story. Let's not clog it up, but we should probably revisit Chinese bikes in a few weeks.
Should do a whole next podcast about Chinese bikes.
Yes, because you and I have a lot to say, because I've ridden the bike you're talking about. I'm peaked on the CF Moto. There's some demographics. I just published an article. Listeners probably know about that already. Like, it's a big deal. So I
want to ride that Cove 800.
Agreed.
The Cove 800, they're talking
yes,
sub 400 pounds dry. And I noticed the fuel tank is under the seat. It's partially like up kind of like partially up front, and it's partially under the seat. Air filters under the seat. Like, it's all the Chinese. I'm going to say this real quick. The Chinese have listened to what the Americans want, and they're actually building it. Yes. Versus all the other manufacturers are like, this is what we think you want. And when we give feedback, they don't want to hear it. They're too cool. Cove breaks something and is open and is like, hey, we broke this. It's getting fixed on the next bike. Thanks for your feedback. We appreciate you. Other manufacturers are like, we don't need your suggestions. We build perfect motorcycles. And I've dealt with that personally from manufacturers. And I think it's very refreshing to see that from Cove. I'll leave it at that.
That's a good point. No, that's a beautiful one. We are unfortunately against the wall. I think you covered most of what makes sense for adventure riders to harden their bike. What closing advice would you have for those folks, of anything you may have missed, or just general mantra on how to do that?
How to do what?
Prepare your bike for difficult off-road riding. Like, do you have a comment about mentality to approach, or any other closing comments?
Man, I mean, it's just being realistic about where you want to go. First, always bring somebody, always be safe. Second, you know, you want to plan for things to break, and you want to look for stuff on the bike that you think is going to be a problem, and you want to try and either protect it or remove it before it's a problem, including things that may hurt you, like
Yeah.
foot pegs, and boots. So I think a lot of people get nervous about going out and trying, and I think, though I'm kind of a nervous person and I'm not a super confident person, and I'm very like self-conscious with like my riding, and it takes a lot, and usually someone to help me like plan things. When I'm there, I think the only reason I've gotten to a point where I'm at, which is basically still learning and a noob, is I'm not afraid to try things and fail and break things and change my mind and change my views and make adjustments and throw away the part that 6 months ago I was like, this is the best thing since sliced bread. And now I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's something different, and being able to grow and adapt, I think is huge. And just having an open mind to things is super important.
That's beautiful. I don't want to hijack that. I want to add everything's fixable except residual value. That's the only catch. That one's tough. So yeah, no.
It's a bike.
No, yeah, no.
Buy
Now
it to ride
that,
it. If you bought it to
yeah,
make money, you should have bought a stock or something like.
yeah. You
Yeah,
should have
or
sold
you
in
should have bought a rare
2022.
bike. Yeah, you just like, yeah. I don't. If you're buying bikes because you're worried about the resale value, you might not be doing the
Right.
right
Well,
thing.
the average motorcyclist sells their bike in 3 to 5 years, I think is what it is. I only brought that up because yeah, if you thought that bikes were an appreciating asset that only existed between 2020 and 2022, at least for a little while. So know that now, but yeah, other than that, so
No, you buy used
well,
with the Farkles on it, you get a good deal. You buy it new, yeah, you're screwed.
yeah, yep. There's lots of that. Where can people find Andy? What links do you want to leave for the listeners?
Heavy Enduro is our company where we do adventure bike training. If you want to hit us up for training, we are going to be, I believe, at Red River Scramble again this year doing another training session. Right? That was
Hopefully,
super fun. I had a lot of fun there. So we have training sessions in the Midwest and Chicago. We'll have training session at Red River Scramble. Um, I am Overkill Andy on Instagram. I am just me on Facebook, Andy Janik. I don't really go on Facebook that much. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, we're doing Romania this year, which we didn't talk too much about, but keep an eye out for us. I'm going to be training over the next 6 months for, well, 5 months now for Romania. I'm going to do Grinding Stone Hard Enduro. I'll probably do another Hard Enduro. I'm actually flying out tomorrow or Friday to go to California to ride with the Wolf Crew. I'm going to do some training before Grinding Stone with Radek. We're going to be flying back and forth, going to the West Coast, doing a lot of training this winter.
sweet, awesome.
So yeah, I really want to do well at
Awesome.
Romania, but I
What
might
are the
just die.
dates for Red Bull Romaniacs?
It's like mid-July. I can't remember the
Okay.
exact dates off the top of my head, but it is
Okay.
mid-July. You probably won't see me on any of the coverage because I doubt they usually just show pros.
Yeah,
Like it's
I just
usually just
want
all gold guys.
to make sure the episode comes out for. Okay. Any last closing comments for the listeners?
Pretty much
Yep,
it,
he's
man.
shaking his head. All
No,
right.
be awesome. Have a good attitude. Go ride with people. Have fun. If you got any questions, don't be afraid to hit me up. I'm always an open book. I've got a lot of hard learned experience on stuff, and I love helping people out and getting people into it. So between gears and bike and RVs and anything motorcycle related that gets you there, I have a wealth of knowledge that I am willing to share.
Awesome. With that, we'll catch the listeners down the road.